Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome along to this afternoon's Planning Board meeting. I'm Councillor Kelsey and I'm here to chair this meeting this afternoon. We will start off directly by going over to Democratic Services Officer, which this afternoon is Mr. Chris Harrod, to read out the housekeeping notices. Mr. Harrod.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, members, and also members of the public watching live on YouTube. Just some housekeeping for this meeting. Please note that this meeting of the Planning Committee is being recorded by the Council for live and subsequent broadcast and will be published on the Council's website for a minimum of 6 months. In order to ensure that the meeting is managed effectively, please, could everyone present please follow these ground rules for speaking. Only speak when invited to by the Chairman. State your name before you speak if you've not been introduced by name. Mute your microphone when you are not talking. After the committee has heard from the planning officer and received written statements from the public and ward councillors, the Chairman will ask committee members who wish to speak to do so by typing RTS in the instant message conversation panel at the bottom left-hand side of your screen and click the arrow button to send. Please note that this panel is visible to all parties and do not use this panel for any other purpose other than requesting to speak. The Chairman will ask officers to respond or clarify as required, and if at any point you wish to speak again, please type RTS. And finally, please note that when the vote is taken, the Chairman will read out the name of each committee member in turn, and they will need to indicate whether they are voting for or against the move or are abstaining from the vote altogether. Please ensure all background noise is kept to a minimum and mobile phones and other devices switched off or turned to silent for the duration of the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. So I will now go to each member that is participating this afternoon, and I will ask you to state your names and your roles. And I will start with Councillor Steve Barron.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Steve Barron, Ward Councillor for Parkstone.
Councillor Mike Brooke.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I'm here. I've read everything, and Councillor for Broadstone Ward.
Thank you. Councillor Simon Bull.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor for Winton East Ward, Simon Bull.
Councillor Malcolm Davies.
Fantastic. Just doing roll call now.
Sorry, could somebody repeat that, please? Councillor Davies.
Hi there. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Davies. Councillor Decent.
Turn your mic down on the side.
Councillor Decent? No. Councillor Peter Hall? Councillor Hall?
Councillor for Christchurch Town Centre.
Thank you. Councillor Paul Hilliard?
Paul Hilliard, Councillor for Muddyford, Stampit and West Highcliffe.
Thank you. Councillor Toby Johnson?
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Toby Johnson, Councillor for Alderney and Bourne Valley Ward.
Thank you. Councillor Marianne Lepodovin?
Councillor for Newtown and Heatherlands Ward, Marianne Lepedvin.
Thank you. Councillor Bob Lawton?
Bob Lawton, Councillor for West Southbourne.
Councillor Tony O'Neill?
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Tony O'Neill, Ward Councillor Penn Hill.
Councillor Ann Stribley?
Ann Stribley, Parkstone Ward Councillor.
Mr. Simon Gould?
Thank you, Chairman. Simon Gould, Development Management Manager, BCP.
Mr. Doug Evans?
Thank you, Chairman. Doug Evans, Development Management Team Leader.
Mr. David Hodges?
Thank you, Chair. David Hodges, Development Management Team Leader.
Mr. Trevor Badley?
Thank you, Chairman. Trevor Badley, Dorset Council.
Mr. Tom Hubbard?
Tom Hubbard, Senior Planning Officer, BCP.
Mr. Lee Smith? Mr. Smith, are you with us?
Chairman, it's Mr. Evans. Because Mr. Smith was attending for a specific item which may not now be considered, I've suggested he may not need to attend. He's probably monitoring without joining the meeting.
Thank you for that, Mr. Evans. Appreciate that information. Sanoba Khan?
Thank you, Chairman. Highways Officer, Sanoba Khan.
Ms Tanya Coulter.
Thank you, Chairman. Tanya Coulter, Solicitor Legal Services.
Thank you. And we have Chris Harrod, who is Democratic Conservatives. We have other Democratic officers working away in the background to make sure the meeting is running as it should. We will now move on to the agenda items for this meeting. Item number 1 being apologies. Do we have any apologies, please, Mr Harrod?
Yes, Chairman, we've had apologies today from Councillor Trent, and we've also had a notification that Councillor McCormack will be running slightly late, but will be joining us as soon as he possibly can. Thank you.
Thank you. And do we have any substitute members, please?
Yes, as a result of Councillor Trent having given his apologies, Councillor Mike Brooke shall be substituting for him today.
Thank you. Declarations of interest. Does any member taking part today have any declarations of interest in any of the applications, please? I take it that is a no, so we'll go with a no there. Item number 4 is confirmation of minutes. Could I ask any members if they have anything to say about the minutes before we agree to signing them? No?
Sorry, Chairman. Chris in Democratic Services here. Just to let you know, it is the intention of Democratic Services just to amend the minutes ever so slightly. It's purely down to the numbering, which should have been reset at the beginning of the municipal year. So where they start in the region of 190 odd, it should be reset to 1. So just requesting permission to do that, and then these minutes will be accurate too.
Mr Harrod, you may go ahead with that if there are no objections from anyone else on that one. Thank you. So after that, we will then go into public issues. After each officer's presentation on each of the individual applications, I will refer to the Democratic officer to read out any written statements before we hear from ward councillors who wish to speak. We have several items on this afternoon, but with the board's agreement, I just wish to say a couple of things about 2 of the agenda items. The first of the agenda items with respect to the Merley Court application. This has been withdrawn, and I did this in consultation with the Vice Chairman and officers because of legal issues that have not yet been come to fruition, and it is better for everyone, particularly the applicant and the council, if we defer this until we have full information. I do not want the board to be responsible for making any decisions where we do not have the true and correct facts in front of us. As members will be aware, we also had Panorama Road on the schedule for this afternoon, and late yesterday afternoon the council was presented with a very late submission on a legal matter. And again, this morning I had conversations with both Democratic and Planning, and I made the decision that I would withdraw this application this afternoon so that legal people can have the correct amount of time to study this document. It's very unfortunate that it came in so late yesterday that our own legal team have not had time to study it. So therefore, I have withdrawn this application from this afternoon's meeting, and it will be heard once the legal documents have been studied and we can have a response to them. Does anyone have any questions regarding those 2 items, please? Councillor Stephen Bartlett.
Thank you, Chair. Just for the record, I got missed out on the introductions earlier on. So it's Councillor Steve Bartlett from Red Hill and Northbourne Ward. Yeah, just to cover the point here, are late submissions admissible to the debate, given that there's a cut-off time for submissions to the planning board?
Yes, unfortunately they are. This is something that I will speak to both Democratic Legal and also to the chairman of the Constitution Working Group at another stage outside of this meeting. I personally think it is extremely unfair on all concerned that people can do this to us at the last minute, knowing that we will not have time to study them and come up with the correct answers to enable the board. And I'm very much concerned that the board will be in the highlight on this one to make the decision that is required. We have to make sure that we are clear and transparent in everything we do, and I will not allow the board to be in a situation where that cannot happen. So that is why I made the decision this morning to withdraw it.
Well done.
Are you happy with that, Councillor Bartlett? I know you're on the working group, so I will talk to you with regards to this after the meeting.
Unfortunately, I'm not on the working group, which I won't go into, but yeah, it's just I wonder the relevance of, we have this published cut-off date for receipt of comments, and how does that stack up with getting a comment after that date and then taking it into account to affect the way we do the process? I mean, it's conceivable that a member of the public could say, well, actually, you didn't take my view into account because I submitted it after the date, and not necessarily a legal matter. I've got some concerns about that, but this is something that can be discussed by the overview and scrutiny, the Audit and Governance Committee and the review of the Constitution. So I think you're absolutely right. It needs to go there. Thank you.
Ms. Coulter, I wonder if you wanted to come in from a legal aspect on this at this time.
I can do, Chair. Sorry, I'm just getting the video started. Yes, I can. It is a difficult issue. I mean, this is a legal submission submitted by a resident who had already submitted his request to speak in time. So it's additional documentation provided by someone that has already requested that position. It is difficult. If you hold a hard line and disregard it, then clearly there is a potential challenge there as well, and you have case law in that respect. So it's very difficult to ignore something that is submitted, but at the same time, you need to be fair in having an opportunity to consider things, sort of rationally and with due consideration. And I think on this occasion, because of the nature of the submission and the issues that it raises, our advice is that we do need an opportunity to review this fully so that we can advise you as committee members fully so that you're informed and able to make a decision. There will be other occasions when that view may be different and we can deal with it in the afternoon, but on this occasion our advice is that you do defer and we have an opportunity to consider it with the planning officers.
Thank you, Ms. Coulter, I appreciate that. Mr. Hodges.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Just apologies, and just to let you know that we had a little bit of technical difficulty getting Kim Bowditch into the Skype call, but as she's presenting items 6A and 6B, the first two items, it'd be helpful if Kim could just introduce herself as an officer present, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Hodges. Kim.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Nice to have you here. I will come back to you shortly if you would like to get the presentation ready.
Yeah, of course.
Mr. Gould.
Thank you, Chairman. I was actually just requesting to speak, but Tanya's sort of covered most of the points that I was going to raise. I think, to be fair, in respect to Panorama Road, it's not a question of when the submission was made, because it may well have been made before the midday deadline of yesterday, but it's about the content of the submission, and so technically it might have landed on the right side of the line in terms of the deadline, but it's about the content and the time that's then available for officers to present, to consider it, and then to present obviously a response to members. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Gould. As I say, we will discuss this after the meeting. It's not something to be discussed within this meeting, but we will look into this afterwards. So we will move on now with the schedule of planning applications, and the first application we deal with this afternoon, item 6A, is Herne Quarry, Herne Court Lane, Christchurch, and I would ask if you could come forward now with the presentation, please, Ms. Bowditch.
Whoops. Apologies, Chairman. I'm having a few technical difficulties, as you can tell. Let me see if I can find a presentation. Oops. Which I can't. Rats. Sincere apologies. I'm actually having incredible difficulties doing anything. Can you bear with me 1 second while I try and sort this out? I won't be a second. Thank you.
Kim, if you require it,
yes,
I will speak to Democratic, and maybe I could come back to you if we do the next application
Yep, that's absolutely fine. Yes, that would be great. Thank you. Thanks very much.
Do that, please.
Okay.
Mr. Garrett?
Yes, Chairman. If you wish to reorder the agenda, that is within your gift as Chairman.
Okay, in that case, if we go on to item D, 6D, 4 Queen's Park Avenue, and deal with that one, and then we will come back and do the Herne Court ones afterwards. So could I have the officer presenting for Queen's Park, Mr. Hubbard? Could you prepare that one, please?
Good afternoon, Chairman. I've also got a problem here. Sorry. On the share, I can't share the presentation. There's no option to do it at the moment. I've not seen that before. Oh, sorry, it's just come up. Yep, hang on. Okay, can you confirm when you can see the presentation, please?
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Hubbard.
Okay. So this application relates to 4 Queen's Park Avenue in Bournemouth, and the proposal is for alterations, extensions, formation of dormer windows and conversion of dwelling house to 5 flats with cycle store, modification of vehicle access and formation of parking spaces. This application follows a refusal of planning permission under delegated powers last year for a conversion to 6 flats. That application was refused for a number of reasons, including the size and design of the extensions, the impact on trees, and a substandard parking layout in terms of the number of spaces and highway safety issues. So this slide gives you some context as where the site lies in Bournemouth. Queen's Park Avenue is a long and wide tree-lined avenue which runs east to west across this part of the town. It's a relatively busy road, though it's not a classified road. The site is close to the junction with Charminster Road, which runs north to the south, and the roundabout there known as the Five Ways roundabout. So here we have a closer view of the site showing that it has a deep plot with a long rear garden, similar to other detached properties in Queen's Park Avenue. Charminster Road has a different, more mixed character, which includes blocks of flats and terraces with ground floor commercial uses. The application site is known as 4 Queen's Park Avenue, though it's actually, as you can see, the first property on the southern side of the road as you come off the roundabout. So this is an aerial view of the area. You can see sort of mature trees along Queen's Park Avenue and also around the application site itself. You can see the sort of different grain of development between Queen's Park Avenue and sort of higher density Charminster Road and areas to the west. So with a closer, more angled aerial view, you can see, again, immediately to the west of the site is a large 3-storey flat roof block of flats. It's got actually a number of windows and balconies facing the application site. What you can't see in this image is there's actually a driveway and parking area along that side of that block of flats, rather than a sort of private garden area. You can see the properties in Queen's Park Avenue are mainly large detached dwellings. Number 10, this one here, is a block of 4 flats, and you can see they've all got a mix of parking and landscaping to their front garden areas. At the rear of the application site, there's a car park associated with a commercial use on Charminster Road. So moving on to the proposed plans, this shows the existing and proposed site plan. The existing house has got a driveway which runs along the western side of the site, leading to an attached garage. And it's also got a pedestrian access on the other side of the site with a sort of lawned area between. The pedestrian access will be closed under this proposal. The existing vehicle access just widened a little bit to facilitate additional parking on the front where that lawn area is at the moment. There's 5 parking spaces proposed for the 5 flats, which meets the requirements of the Bournemouth Parking SPD on an unallocated parking basis, and there's a condition to ensure that is the case. The previous application on the site was refused in part due to a shortfall of parking, but in that case there was an additional flat than is proposed here, as well as a greater impact on the trees that are to be retained, and there was also a lack of landscaping at the front, with a harmful impact on the character of the area. Reducing the number of flats by one and the improvements to the landscaping, particularly with the retention of a strip along the frontage of the site here, has overcome those concerns in the opinion of the officer. Some of the additional new parking and turning areas are within the root protection areas of trees at the front and side of the site, but significant mitigation measures are proposed, including special surfacing and root protection measures. There are also some minor thinning or pruning works, but no significant trees are to be removed, and the council's tree officer is now satisfied with the proposals. You can also see that there are extensions proposed to the building, principally in terms of two-storey rear extensions, but these are not dominating in terms of the large plot size and good gaps to neighbours. There are windows in the block of flats to the west, but the proposed extensions are stepped well away from the boundary here, and there's a sufficient gap between the properties. On the other side, the extensions would be beyond the rear elevation of this neighbouring property, but again, there's a good gap between them, so it wouldn't be visually intrusive or overbearing. Moving on to the elevations, the existing property is a fairly typical large two-storey detached dwelling, which appears to be generally unaltered since original construction. There have been some recent applications in terms of permitted development submissions for various extensions, but these have not been implemented, and the architect has marked them on the plans. That does explain the red and blue dashed lines on the proposed site plan and elevation drawings. The proposed plans illustrate the extensions, which are shaded in grey on the plan here. There is a small full height extension to the rear with a further lower extension with a lower eaves height, which steps down from the first extension. There's a sort of cropped gable on the full height extension. These extensions have been reduced in size since the initially refused application and are now considered acceptable in terms of their design, scale and subservience to the original property. On the floor plans, there are 5 flats in the building, including 3 on the ground floor and 2 on the upper floors. This slide shows a plan which accompanied the application, showing that flats 4 and 5 still comply with the government's technical standards on housing sizes, even accounting for areas of reduced headroom that these flats have in places. Although space standards have not been locally adopted in Bournemouth, all the flats meet the minimum requirements of these technical housing standards, except for flat 1, which has only a 1 square metre shortfall, which wasn't considered materially significant. So again, this is a further improvement over the review scheme. There's a significant level of detail in the submission on this matter, including the report, but the reason for that is because it formed part of the original reasons for refusal on the last scheme, and it's also been the subject of local objections. But in this case, the living conditions have been demonstrated to be acceptable and sufficiently improved over the previous application. This is a slide showing the landscaping in a bit more detail. There's an emphasis on the front of the site because the rear is generally left as existing with a lawn, and there's a lot of mature trees and hedging. At the front in particular, there'll be dense planting along the front boundary, which is an improvement over the review scheme and will help to maintain the character of the area and soften that new parking area. So some photos to show you the site context then. So this is the site from the street. You can see the existing vehicle access and driveway, and you can see the access to the flats next door, which is used as parking, and access to some garages at the back of the site. A slightly different angle, you can see the pedestrian access that's to be blocked up, The brick wall itself will be retained and filled in there, and just a little bit removed to widen that vehicle access on the other side. And again, you've got the enhanced landscaping to screen that parking area. This is the rear of the site. There you can see that there's mature landscaping on the boundary to the neighbouring property, which will be retained but trimmed back a little. There's a proposed cycle store along that side of the site, which is just a small single-storey building. Again, the rear of the site looking to the other side, it shows that Woodlands Court block of flats. You can see there are flats with an outlook over the application site, but the proposed extensions are set well away from this boundary, so there's a good gap between them. This is the current side view of 4 Queen's Park Avenue from the Woodlands Court block of flats, which is again that parking area that we saw on the frontage a minute ago. There's a proposed rear extension which is deeper on the other side of the site, so the view here won't change significantly. This is a photo of the rear of the site, showing there's a number of mature trees in that parking area at the back, but this area of the site won't be affected by the proposed development, and those trees will all stay. And finally, for context, this slide shows adjacent properties on Queen's Park Avenue and demonstrates that the proposal is not out of keeping in terms of the amount of frontage parking, and may actually be better than some, such as number 10, for example, in terms of the improved landscaping. So overall then, this proposal for a conversion to 5 flats has been demonstrated to overcome the reasons for refusal relating to the proposal last year for 6 flats, which was refused under delegated powers. There are no highway objections to the level of parking or in terms of highway safety. The application protects the existing trees on the site, provides an appropriate level of intensification of the site with sufficient size flats and acceptable living conditions. The extensions are of an appropriate size and design and would not be materially harmful to neighbours, so the application has therefore been recommended for approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hubbard. Councillor Stribley, you have put an RTS. Is it to do with this application? Councillor Stribley.
Sorry, Chairman, my apologies. I just have some questions when we get into the debate.
Okay, thank you. I'll come back to you shortly.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I will now go to the Democratic officer, who will read out the statements that have been received relating to this application before passing to other councillors. Mr. Howard, please.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. 2 objections received on time. The first of which is from a Mr. Stephen Blandimer, who writes, I would like to set out 2 reasons why the committee must reject this application. 1, inadequate living space, and 2, poor parking provision. Space is an essential factor when people are choosing a home and has significant ongoing impact on their quality of life. A lack of space can compromise basic lifestyle needs and have more profound knock-on effects on health, educational attainment, family relationships, and even social cohesion. Flat 1 falls short of the 61 metres squared minimum for a 2-bed flat in the nationally described minimum space standards. Flat 2 and 3 are suitable only for a single person, with a single bed being below the 11.5 metre squared standard for a double bedroom. Flat 4 and 5 show no breakdown of the various ceiling heights of the pitch roof, so the officer cannot conclude they are compliant. Without the superfluous corridor on the 2nd floor, Flat 5 have failed to meet the standard. Parking is another important factor in selecting a home, but this acutely contributes to safety issues for the residents and other road users. The local authority plan does not aim to influence car use, and car owners want to park close to their properties. So claims of access to public transport are a nonsense. The irregular layout is not considered within the SPD. It is therefore incomprehensible to understand how the officers can conclude that there is adequate manoeuvring space by merely eyeballing the plans without any technical evidence submitted by the applicant. The 2 spaces on the east do not have the 0.8 metre overspill required by the SPD, nor are they at least 0.5 metres from a solid object. in this case the boundary wall. The design and access statement indicates that these spaces are allocated under the section Site History. The agent states the number of units has been reduced to 5, thus each unit is afforded 1 on-site parking space, ergo 1 allocated space per flat. Based on the SPD calculations for Zone 2C3 use, this development would fall 2 spaces short of the 7 required when rounded up. In summary, the application attempts to over-densify the existing dwelling and represents poor design. It is difficult to see how this committee could consciously approve this application, creating rabbit hutch housing that will inevitably lead to overcrowding and poor living standards for future occupants, contrary to policy CS5 and CS23. Further, substandard parking, contrary to policy CS16 and various SPD provisions, will lead to vehicles reversing to or from Queen's Park Avenue, which will interfere with the free flow of traffic and be prejudicial to the highway safety in an area where cars are already routinely parked on verges to avoid blocking the highway. The next statement is from a Mr. Andrew Treadwell, who writes, "I am writing with my objection to the proposed overdevelopment of 4 Queen's Park Avenue. Queen's Park Avenue is characterised by large single-family houses. While there have been various approved conversions to flats within the road, they appear to be of a high quality with suitable parking provision and in keeping with the overall appearance of the road. Converting a 4-bedroom house into 5 individual flats while attempting to keep the look of a single property does not produce quality housing. Several of the flats are so small that the living space is suitable for single occupants only. At least one fails to meet the minimum national standards for space, another only just achieves this by including a corridor. The highly pitched roofs also limit the available space in the property substantially and have not been included in the guideline calculations. In addition, the planned occupancy of the 4 flats are to have below the national guidelines of parking spaces, which will naturally increase parking on the verges of Queen's Park Avenue. The provided parking includes no visitor parking and is only suitable for very small vehicles. Moving cars in and out of the parking bays will require cars to reverse onto a busy road just before a busy junction where views are already limited by trees. There will inevitably be increased road parking by this development, further increasing the risk to the new flats and existing residents. Overall, the developers desire to turn a well-sized family house into as many small flats as possible with minimal regard to the quality of the development is obvious. These flats are of poor design, poor living space, have poor access, are in breach of national guidelines and should clearly be rejected. Approving this application will set a dangerously low precedent for future developments in the area." Moving on to the submission sent on behalf of the applicant. As you have heard, the character is residential, and your own adopted policies support the creation of flatted development in this location. A similar development of 5 flats was approved in 2019 at 39 and 39A Queen's Park Avenue. This application site is within 400 metres of a key transport route and district centre, so the scheme supports sustainable development principles. From the street scene, evidence of intensification of the use is discreetly hidden as the scheme retains the appearance of a large detached house, as you have been informed. The design changes that have been undertaken represent significant improvements and reduction in massing compared to the previous scheme by reason of the loss of the large box dormers, reduced ridge height and extension depth. The formation of the car parking arrangement and proposed landscaping features will be consistent with the prevailing pattern of development. The proposal accommodates the 5 flats without harm to neighbouring occupiers by reason of overlooking, dominance or overshadowing. All primary windows have been positioned with outlook over landscaping areas to the front or lengthy communal garden to the rear. The accommodation within the scheme will offer a mixture of 2, 1 and 3 2-bedroom units, so we'll secure social mixed occupation. Whilst the DCLG technical housing standards cannot be used per se, as there is no adopted policy in the local plan, the standards do offer a benchmark of acceptability. Each of the units exceeds the standards, so occupiers will enjoy good internal space and outlook. Furthermore, there is also adequate headroom in each flat to meet prescribed standards. Provision of secure and covered cycle storage is accommodated with good accessibility to make the preference of cycling a realistic alternative. There is adequate car parking provision to meet your adopted policy. An amended site plan has been submitted that shows 3 of the 5 bays being 3.1 metres wide to enable better accessibility, with the remaining 2 bays being 2.6 metres wide. In the last planning committee, you supported a scheme of 6 flats contained within a building which was designed to appear as a large detached dwelling, as it was a good approach to increase housing numbers without compromising the character and appearance of the area. This scheme offers 5 flats in a building that retains the proportions of other nearby houses. There's no adverse impact to the street scene, no harm to neighbours, and no harm to highway safety or landscaping features. The applicant has responded positively to all requests by your officers, including those received in the past few days, which has led to the recommendation to approve. So I would ask that you endorse this recommendation to approve. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Harrod. I will now call on Councillor Mark Henderson. Councillor Anderson.
Thank you, Chairman. Members, I will. Can you hear me, Chairman? Sorry.
Yes, I can. Thank you, Councillor Anderson.
Okay, sorry. Right. Members, I will restrict my comments to 4 areas, which I'm sure the committee will, after hearing, understand why this application is to be refused. Trees. Last year, we all agreed to a climate change emergency motion that also promoted biodiversity. Yet we have an officer recommending to the committee an application that will cause damage to the biodiversity of the area, policy CS30. Do nothing about minimising pollution, policy CS38, and interesting enough, potentially contribute to alluvial flooding in the area. I quote from the report: trees, T5, T6, T7 and T8, together with other sited along the rear site boundary with adjoining property T6 at 6 Queen's Park Avenue, will require minor thinning or limb removal and groundworks to enable the development and modified widened front access. The submitted information identifies that the impact of the proposed works, including building, widened access, underground surfaces and surfacing works, including...
Councillor Anderson,
yes.
Sorry to interrupt you. Could all members please make sure that they are muted? Councillor Anderson, it's becoming very difficult to hear you speaking. I'm not sure, there seems to be quite an echo going on. I wonder if you could speak up a little bit. Thank you.
Certainly, Chairman. Is that better?
Thank you very much.
Okay, right, sorry. Right, the widened access, underground services and surfacing works, including to the frontage parking area, could all be managed through appropriate groundwork techniques and root and tree protection measures that would safeguard the long-term interests of existing trees. This is not minor workings, this is major damage to root stock and stunting growth on all these valuable species. In the recent past, this area has been subject to alluvial flooding, and these tree works will negate any potential water retention from such flooding. Furthermore, tree T5 will be directly adjacent to the end of the parking bay and will be damaged by any errors on behalf of any vehicle parking in the bay in front of it, as not enough overspill as required by SPD is provided. The Residential Development Guide, a design guide in section 3.11 landscape design states, avoid providing parking areas under trees unless purposefully designed surfaces are to be used to overcome the potential damage that can be caused to root systems, water and nutrient uptake. There's no evidence of this, so it contravenes the design guides. There are no conditions that state that purposefully designed surfaces are to be used, so the application contravenes the design guide. Parking. Normally, when providing parking spaces for flats, spaces are only unallocated when there are fewer than there are flats. In this instance, we have an issue of 5 flats and 5 unallocated spaces. Is this because allocated space calculations mean that they would require 6.5 spaces? I would suggest that this is an attempt by the developer to pretend that these aren't allocated when they clearly will be, there's no reason why they won't. So we'll be in breach of the SPD. If they are unallocated, this will result in on-road parking in an area already congested in the vicinity of a roundabout and on a bend where there have been several attempts made to improve road safety. Already parking on the verge from Woodland Court is damaging the verge and obstructing visibility. Allowing even for all this, we are still left with a situation where the vehicles do not have sufficient space to manoeuvre so they can leave and exit in a forward direction. Paragraph 2.1.14 of the SPD says, turning tracking diagrams may be required to demonstrate that vehicles can manoeuvre safely into and out of spaces. This is vital on a bend approaching a roundabout with significant queues of traffic, where accidents have occurred and where several attempts have been made to improve road safety, again contradicts the SPD. Bins and storage. Why are the developers aiming to provide 10 small bins that will litter the pavement and cause an obstruction in an area that has already been described as dangerous and congested? Surely the more suitable and practical solution will be to replace these with the larger Euro bins. I believe that this contravenes policy 6.1 parts 1, 2 and 4, which states flats will be permitted in built-up area provided the development 1. Respects or enhances the character or the appearance of the area, particularly as regards to material. This doesn't. Respects or enhances the character or appearance of open spaces, either publicly or privately owned, which contribute to the character and appearance of the area. This doesn't. Represents the living conditions of the occupiers. Respects the living conditions of the occupiers of buildings in the vicinity. This doesn't. Finally, if you now look at plans, page 190, you will notice that flat 1's bathroom has a high level window. Now, if this opens, it will be opening directly onto the bin store. If this doesn't, the drawing shows no signs of extractor fans. Its only location could be above the bin store anyway. The occupant of flat 1 will suffer from noise and smells in breach of policy 3.23 and certainly contradicts the residential design guide section 3.7.3. And my final comment is on conditions. For good planning application on a domestic site, you would normally expect to see some conditions applied to the applications, such as the ones you're hearing before you today in 72 Lincoln Road, Hall, BH12 2HU, agenda item 6F with 5 conditions, or 44 Western Road, Hall, BH13 6EU, agenda item 6G with 9 conditions. You should be concerned that a planning officer needs to apply 17 conditions to an application to get it to a state that he believes is acceptable for this committee. Are you happy with this? So finally, I feel I have given you sufficient evidence and policies to refuse this application, and I do urge you to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. Before I go to members, Mr. Hubbard, there were rather a lot of points made in both Councillor Anderson's and in the objectors' deputations. Is there anything you would like to come back and share with the board before we go to their questions?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, the objectors' deputation makes a lot of comments about the national space standards, but I just want to emphasise that we haven't adopted these space standards. But even despite that, there's only one flat, Unit 1, which is 1 square metre short of the National Technical Housing Standard. So I don't think, in my view, that's sufficient to justify a refusal, and it's probably unlikely to be supported in an appeal situation. The 1 square metre shortfall relates to a 60 square metre flat instead of 61 square metres. It's a 2-bed flat, and the sizes for these are actually quite generous compared to, say, 1-bed units where space is a bit more critical, where you wouldn't want to be too far below the standard. So I think that's not a significant issue in my view. The other flat referred to with the corridor, even if you take out that corridor, it still meets the space standard for a 2-bedroom flat. And then those in the roof, there's been a significant amount of information provided to you by the architect to demonstrate that it meets those standards. So I think they've gone above and beyond the sort of the normal requirements really, even because we haven't adopted these standards. In terms of the parking and turning issues, the highways officer is satisfied that it meets the requirements of our parking SPD. The turning area of 6 metres is sufficient to meet those requirements, and we don't need to have the sort of the turning figures to show that, because that relates more to large new housing developments rather than just small individual developments like this. In terms of the impact on trees raised by Councillor Anderson, yes, the parking area is in the root protection area of some of those trees, but again, the applicant's gone a long way through an arboricultural method statement to demonstrate that there won't be an impact on those trees, because they are proposing a cellular confinement system, which is a sort of a honeycomb structure that spreads the load, so there won't be any root compaction there. The tree officer is satisfied there won't be any damage to those the roots of those trees. And I think the final point about the number of parking spaces, they will be unallocated, and that will be secured through a condition. So because they will be unallocated, that meets the requirements of the parking SPD, which I think requires 4.3 spaces for this development. So the 5 spaces, it meets that requirement, and therefore it was considered acceptable by the highways officer. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hubbard. Appreciate your answers there. Councillor Ann Stribley.
Thank you, Chairman. I found the viewing the presentation was a little bit difficult because the diagrams were so small. So I have 3 questions. In the east elevation overlooking number 6, I think, or towards number 6, are there any new large low-levelled, low-silled windows on the first floor which would overlook any private space in the neighbouring property? Is question 1. Again, on the picture I have in front of me, there are very high chimneys on each side of the property currently. Are they still to be retained, or are they going to be removed? Because high chimneys on older properties can be potentially very dangerous. And the other question, which Councillor Anderson mentioned, was my concern about refuse bins. I couldn't see any space at the front of the property or towards the front for storage of up to 10 refuse bins. And I do take the point that 10 refuse bins outside, or 5 literally outside every week on the street, could be a real problem. Is there any possibility that there is a space close to the front entrance, because I know the pedestrian entrance is being closed, so we only now have the one entrance to, I think, the west of the property. We only have that one entrance, and what is the position of bins? I take the point that 2 large bins might be a lot tidier than 10 small ones.
Thank you, Mr. Stribley. I'll come back to Mr. Hubbard.
Thank you. Okay, so I've got the elevation plan on the screen. The query was in relation to the east side elevation, which is this one here. So you can see that the only new windows are high-level roof lights, so that there isn't any overlooking issue resulting from the development.
Good, thank you.
Second query was in relation to the chimneys. As you can see on the proposed plan, they are shown to be retained. It's not really a planning consideration for this application. in terms of the sort of safety of those. But if they do in the future become an issue, then it's not a heritage asset. It's not in a conservation area. So, I mean, they would be able to lower or remove those chimneys, presumably without the requirement for planning permission. So it wasn't really a concern of officers in that respect. The bins, you can see on the site plan, they are shown in a storage area to the side of the property in front of what was the garage. There is a condition, it was put on the addendum update for a refuse management plan, which will tell us how that will be managed, because at the moment the bins are too far from the highway for a council collection, and there is no storage area shown, so presumably they would have to go for a private collection, hence the requirement for that condition to give us those details.
In which case, Chairman, I would be very reluctant to be giving permission or refusing it, doing it one way or the other, until we actually know what is proposed, because refuse collection and bins all over the place can be a nightmare for the neighbourhood, as well as being very unsightly. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stribley. I think, as we're aware, on these conditions for waste management, they do have to be agreed by the planning authority, and I'm sure the local planning authority and our own waste people will take that into consideration if this were to be granted, and before that permission is granted. I will move on now to Councillor Lepodovin.
Thank you. Going to see this site, it's clear that a lot of the neighbouring properties have already been converted into flats, but retain the appearance of dwellings. So as regards the principle, I'm happy with it. But I do have concerns, and my concern is also to do with the current garage area and the bin storage. Is it right that, is it correct that the fabric of the current garage is just going to be converted rather than demolished and rebuilt? The windows for what is the bathroom at the front presumably will be obscure glazed, so that's a question for confirmation. And as has already been touched on, they appear to be looking straight out onto the bin storage area, which may not be very satisfactory from an odour aspect, shall we say. As regards bin collections, I would assume that the expectation is that the residents will take their bins to the roadway for collection on bin day and return them. I've experienced locally of situations like that where a condition is made that they must not be left out beyond bin collection day, and I'm afraid people are very inclined to abuse it and just leave them there for days on end. So this wants very strict, very careful handling. So I would be grateful for comments from the officer about how this will be dealt with. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Mr. Hubbard, would you like to respond, please?
Yes, I mean, again, I would say that we've put this condition on for a refuse management plan, which should help to find out the detail of how it will work. There would need to be a collection area at the front of the site if they're going for the council collection, because we wouldn't want them on the highway. And I think the previous application was refused because it had the bins stored at the front, and it wasn't sort of an attractive solution. So hence they pushed them back into the site, but they will probably require a private collection or more information on how they plan to manage those bins without causing that impact on the street. But again, the condition is a fairly standard one that we use a lot in this sort of situation, and they can provide the information later on when they know how it will operate. Yes, that garage is probably a conversion of what's there at the moment. I can't see that it's any different in terms of size. The window is shown to be a high level window to the bathroom. It would probably be obscure glazed for privacy as it's a bathroom. I'm just trying to zoom in on the plan, or I've got on a different one here to see if it says anything. It's not noted on the plan, I don't think, but it could be conditioned as such if required. I don't think that the storage of bins outside that particular window was a particular concern, because it isn't a habitable room. It's only a bathroom. They're not showing whether those windows are openable, but presumably they would need some sort of ventilation for the bathroom, but they would only be sort of small fan lights. It wasn't raised as a concern because it's not a habitable room, I think.
Thank you, Mr. Hubbard. Councillor Podovin, you wish to come back?
Yes, I do, because I'm very concerned that we're getting from the officer, I think, or it seems, or it might. I think we need more certainty if we're going to agree any proposal. The waste management plan, clearly we need to have something spelt out now.
I'm not sure that we actually do that in very many applications. I think it's often that a management plan is put in place, or is asked to be put in place, once we have deliberated it here, and it's then for the officers to then accept or reject that. And of course, if they reject it after listening to the debate today, then that planning permission will not be granted or will not go forward.
Okay, but also, I mean, a simple question, are these windows going to be obscure glazed? Not sure. Again, could be a condition, but
well, I think if listening to the members, if they wish to grant this, we can ask, if we have that concern, it is within the power of the committee to ask for that to be a condition on the planning.
Well, I would certainly ask that if we do decide.
I would support that
as a condition.
Thank you, Councillor Provodovin. Councillor Lawton, I noted that you wanted to ask a question. Please go ahead.
Yeah, just a quick one. Can the officer quickly confirm, are these flats for sale or are they for rent?
Mr. Hubbard?
I'm afraid I don't have that information, Chairman. I don't know.
Thank you, Mr. Hubbard. Councillor Bartlett.
Just one quick one more, please. Chairman. I support Councillor Mariam's suggestion that we put that as a proposal for frosted glass, etc.
Yeah, that's fine. I'll note that. Thank you. Councillor Bartlett.
Thank you, Chair. I think we have to be mindful that this application has been developed from the initial one that was refused, and an awful lot of officer consideration has gone into it. And now they've come up with an application which has been satisfactory as far as the officers were concerned. I think there's been a lot of detailed questions asked of the officers, which he's responded to extremely well. And I don't have any problems or issues outstanding now that these points have been clarified. I would like to move that we accept the officer's recommendation to grant this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bartlett. I have that noted. Do we have a seconder for Councillor Bartlett's move?
I'll second that, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Lawton. And you would like the noting of an obscure window put in as a condition, Councillor Lawton?
Yes, please.
Thank you. Is there any... Oh, sorry, Councillor Hilliard, you asked to speak.
No, Chairman, I was just going to second it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Hilliard. And Councillor Podovin, is tenure a planning issue? I'm not sure that it is. I would just ask Mr. Hubbard to confirm that. Mr. Hubbard?
No, it's not in this particular case. I wouldn't say it was a planning issue. No.
Thank you, Mr. Hubbard. And Councillor Stribley, you wish to come back as well?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Just on the bin store problem, we heard from Mr. Hubbard that one of the previous reasons for refusal was inadequate and unsightly bin storage at the frontage. Now there is no provision for that, and we're talking about an agreement. Well, the developers can agree to anything, but then if the residents choose to put their bins out, or the agreement, whoever signs the agreement doesn't honour it, you're then stuck with 5 flats and no proper bin store within reach of the highway. Now, I suspect that would lose a parking space. I'm not sure on that one, but I am very concerned that we're looking at this without provision for the refuse bins, without assurance that there will be proper provision or a proper scheme which will last more than a few months. Because once we grant permission, these flats hopefully would be there for the next 20 or 30 years, or however long one might expect them to survive. And I'm sure the residents don't want 20 or 30 years of rubbish all down the street.
Mr. Hubbard, would you like to respond to that, please?
Well, I'd say, I mean, the plans clearly show a bin storage area. There is somewhere to store the bins that is an acceptable place away from the street, which overcomes the previous concerns about sort of cumulative impact of the bins and the parking and the lack of landscaping. To move them back to the front would sort of cause more problems in terms of visual amenity, and it would result in the loss of landscaping. So I think that's the best solution, to put them where they are. The issue is how they get collected, hence the requirement of the refuse management plan, which will need to specify how they're collected. It may be that they have to have a private contractor who comes and collects them, moves the bins from the collection area to the collection vehicle, and then puts them straight back again, unless they can identify somewhere where they can collect the bins. But like you say, the parking area is where it is. There isn't really any room for a storage area for collection, so that might be the way they have to do it.
Thank you, Mr. Hubbard. Mr. Gould.
Sorry, Chairman, I do appreciate that, but come back on it. If the agreement is that the residents put their bins out the night before collection and remove them promptly the next day, that's fine, but we actually know that doesn't happen.
Well, Councillor Stribley, if I may, as I pointed out earlier, the officers have asked for a planning agreement, a waste collection agreement. Once this has been submitted, if it is not satisfactory to the officers, I'm sure they will refuse it. And I also know that Councillor Anderson, in his role as ward councillor, is very vociferous when these sort of things are not kept on, and I'm sure he will encounter our enforcement teams to make sure that the residents are fully aware and are complying. Unfortunately, planning does not take and make allowance for what people do or do not do with their rubbish bins. We can ask, sometimes it's very difficult to take a horse to water and make it drink. We can but ask. These conditions are in place for a reason, and they are legally binding once they are in. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Gould.
Thank you, Chairman. I think between yourself and Mr. Hubbard, you've sort of summed up what I was going to say, but just briefly, on this issue around the bin stores, just to sort of pick up in your addendum, you have the refuge management plan condition, and that makes specific reference to the potential for a private contractor to have to service the development. That should give members some comfort that if the message is out there that previously we've considered it to be harmful to the visual amenities of the area to have a collection point at the front of the site, then the expectation will be on the applicant that they would more than likely have to hire a private refuse collection, and by using a private refuse collection company, their staff will be able to enter the site, collect the bins from where they're shown on the plan and put them immediately back there. So we could avoid the issue of having bins left out, but I also obviously pick up on your point about the fact that would be an enforcement issue as well if they weren't adhering to any agreement. And Chairman, just on the high-level window to the bathroom serving, I think it's Unit 1 on the ground floor, there's been some concern from members around sort of looking in through that window and the proximity of that window to the bin storage area. If members obviously have intimated to add that as a condition to have that obscure glaze, I would suggest that you could alter the wording to condition 9, Chairman, that would give you the comfort to achieve that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gould. Appreciate that. Councillor Bartlett.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, thank you, Chair. I was going to. I think we've probably talked it through now, but the enforcement of people leaving bins out the front of properties is within the community enforcement team, and I routinely have the enforcement team enforcing that in certain properties. So you know, it's not a planning issue. The planning issue has been taken care of by the provision of the bin storage areas that's shown on the plan. People leave it out on the front for collection, we can get the enforcement team to come along and make sure that they don't leave them there, and that's part of our bylaws. So my move remains unaltered, and I wish we could just move to the vote now, please.
I have requests for one more speaker, and we will do just that. Councillor Bull.
Thank you, Chair. It was just, I note that we've been talking about having a private refuge collector as a possibility in the future, that officers would agree or not agree with the applicant. These private refuge collectors, do we have any say in what time they collect? I have residents complaining that they are woken several mornings by different bin collections at 1 and 2 in the morning. Do we have any control or power over that? Can that be part of the planning department's conversation?
No, I personally would think not. I think that would be more of an environmental health department issue, and as a planning board I don't think that would come into us, but I will please ask Mr. Gould to quantify that.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I would tend to agree. I don't know the specific examples that Councillor Bull refers to, but they may be instances where you have residential accommodation, maybe above commercial premises, where maybe commercial premises are having their waste removed during sort of the night hours. But I think it's highly unusual to have you know, refuge vehicles servicing residential developments during the night.
Thank you, Mr. Gould. I will now move on to the vote for this. We have a move by Councillor Bartlett and seconded by Councillor Lawton. When I call your name, could you please answer for or against? Before we do that, I would just like to add that that is with the condition of the obscure glazing window being inserted. I would suggest that that goes in under condition 9. And also, could I ask that the local ward councillor is kept up to date with what the planning is on regards to the waste management, please? Thank you. So we will go ahead. Councillor Barron. For. Councillor Bartlett.
For.
Councillor Mike Brooke.
For.
Councillor Simon Bull.
For.
Councillor Malcolm Davies.
For.
Councillor Peter Hall. Sorry, I cannot hear you, Councillor Hall.
Against.
Against. Councillor Hilliard.
For.
Councillor Toby Johnson.
For.
Councillor Podovin.
For.
Councillor Lawton.
For.
Councillor O'Neill.
For.
And Councillor Stribley.
For.
And myself, Councillor Kelsey, as chairman, also for. Could we have the numbers on that, please, Mr. Harrod?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just to confirm that the votes for the officer recommendation, the numbers are 12, and against I have 1. There were no abstentions.
Therefore, that application is granted with the conditions added, and I would thank everyone for their participation in that event. Mr. Harrod, do we know if Councillor McCormack has joined us yet, please?
Chairman, I don't see his name in the list.
Thank you very much. If we will now go back to item A on the agenda, and that is for Herne Quarry, Herne Court Lane. If we are now ready to proceed with that, we will do so.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm hoping we are. No, we're not. Hold on. It was working a few moments ago. It is always the case, isn't it?
You're jinxed, aren't you?
Yes, I am, basically, yes. Yes, that's more or less the point I've just made. Let's have a quick look and see if... Nope. Let me see if I can find it. If not, I will ask for assistance. We have a resident expert.
Okay, if we cannot go to it, I can move on to another application.
We can, I think. Let's give it a go. Oh, it's hopeful.
It says it's loading.
Yes, it will take a little while. There's not a lot there, but it's moving very slowly. I'm going to put it down to the rain. There we are.
Brilliant.
Is that big enough for everyone to see? That's
Yes,
the key.
that's fine. Thank you.
Okay, right. Okay. Good afternoon, Chairman and members. Essentially, you have two applications for you this afternoon for development or proposals for Herne Quarry, Herne Court Lane. The first application, I understand we're looking at them separately, although you do have a very extensive joint report. The first application looks at the extension to the time frame in which the existing and approved quarry development should be restored. So if I just, okay. So planning permission was granted by the former Dorset County Council in their role as minerals and waste planning executive for quarry works at Herne Quarry, which is, as I'm sure members will be aware, an area of land more or less opposite the access to the airport, the primary access to the airport, enclosed on all sides by open fields and some sporadic residential development. The site has its own access. It's the left-hand turn from the, or right-hand turn, depending on the direction you're travelling, from the traffic light junction, which serves the airport primary access. Essentially, what you're looking at with this application is planning consent was previously granted, as I say, by Dorset County Council for the development of Phase 1, which was the eastern part of the site. Subsequently, planning consent was granted for a western extension to the site. Planning consent was granted on the basis that restoration or remediation work would be granted in the first case by, let me check my dates, by the 20th of August 2030. Subsequent consent for the western extension extended that time frame to the 31st of December 2031. So there's already an anomaly. You already have two planning consents that say two entirely different things. The applicants are now trying to, or are seeking consent to extend the time frame for restoration of the overall site, that is returning it to a level piece of agricultural land, by the 31st of August 2032. So essentially we're looking for an 8-month extension over and above the current planning permission, which will give them consent until December 2031. Addressing the various issues that are raised as part of that remediation extension, and given that the site is currently being monitored as part of an ongoing enforcement practice, the considerations given are that in concert with the proposal that is the next on the agenda for you, which is obviously to continue working at the quarry to extract sub-groundwater level materials. It is practical and advisable for the existing kit that's on site, which is substantial, to be retained on site for the duration of the workout of the minerals deposit. And on that basis, and given that there is very little that we could honestly object to, we've recommended consent to this application. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. I will go over now to Mr. Harrod.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Just bringing the representations up now. So first we have a representation from Mr. Rob Flower, and he states, in your officer's reports it is stated that, having regard to the mitigation of impacts and potential effects associated with the proposed development, and when balancing the remaining residual impacts and their effects against the wider public benefits of the supply of aggregates, there are clear and robust material reasons to justify the approval of both applications. The public benefits deepening the quarry will provide are both economic and environmental, and in terms of economic benefits, we are a local run family business and not a multinational quarry company. We've been operating for over 80 years within the local area of West Hampshire and East Dorset and Bournemouth. The quarry opened in 2004 with a new state-of-the-art mineral processing and concrete batching plants, which took some considerable investment. We now provide the only source of indigenous land and one aggregate in the local area. We supply over 2,000 local individual customers and businesses, but also numerous local major projects such as the recent Blackwater Junction and oxygen tank basis at Bournemouth Hospital. Other than the local supply of mineral, the public benefits we provide include retention of a skilled workforce from the local area, including 23 direct and 25 indirect employees, facility for the recovery of inert waste and quarry restoration, significant contribution to the local economy, providing approximately £450,000 annually in rates and taxes, and the use of local services such as fitter and suppliers. We are a key contributor to BCP and Dorset Council's shared aggregate land bank and support for local charities. The government is seeking to encourage construction and to get Britain building for the recovery of the economy. Key to achieving this is supporting the provision of a local supply of competitively priced construction materials. It is therefore vital that mineral resources which can be worked within acceptable environment constraints like at Herne are supported and not sterilised. In terms of environmental impacts, should it not be possible to secure consent to deepen the quarry, replacement aggregates will need to be imported from outside the local area. This will result in higher aggregate costs and an increase in lorry movements as materials will need to be bought in from outside the area. Alternatively, new greenfield sites will need to be developed. In comparison to deepening the existing quarry, these are significantly less sustainable options, which result in greater environmental and climate change impacts. In light of the significant public benefits of deepening the quarry will provide, I respectfully request that you support your planning officer's recommendation so that planning permission can be granted. Moving on to the next representation, this has come from apologies, it appears to have closed on me. Just bring it back up. This has come from Mr. Nick Dunn, who states, the officer's reports conclude that when considering the provisions of the development plan, national policy and guidance, the environmental information submitted in support of the applications and the representations received, both proposals would provide for sustainable materials development in accordance with the provisions of the development plan. There are no other material considerations that indicate that a decision should be made otherwise. The applications would have been determined by delegated authority if they were not referred to committee by Councillor Phipps due to the perceived impacts on landscape, trees, flooding and noise. An EIA accompanied these applications, which has assessed these impacts in detail. The EIA demonstrated that features would not be removed or introduced that would impact on the landscape or impact on any trees. The EIA included an extensive flood risk assessment that demonstrated that there would be no flood impact from ground and surface waters either on or off site. In terms of noise, it was originally proposed to operate a silent running generator to power a water pump, the acceptability of which was demonstrated in the EIA. Nevertheless, at the request of the nearest resident, it has been agreed to use mains power, thus negating the need for a generator. The EIA was fully scrutinised by professional advisors such as your officer, a mineral planning specialist from Dorset Council and the statutory consultees, who have supported the proposal and not raised objection. Finally, I note that there is a clear recognition in the MPPF and your mineral strategy that minerals can only be worked where they are found and are essential to support economic growth. As a result, the MPPF requires you to give great weight to the benefits of mineral extraction when determining applications. The MPPF also requires councils to maintain a 7-year land bank of sand and gravel. The mineral from deepening the quarry has already been included in the River Terrace sand and gravel land bank, which is tied up in only 3 operational quarries. Herne is the only operational quarry in the BCP area. If consent isn't granted to deepen the quarry, this land bank would be deficient. BCP and Dorset councils would be required to work with industry to seek a replacement supply. To avoid the impacts of importing aggregates from outside of this area, a new greenfield site would be required to replace this lost mineral resource. In the absence of any tangible, significant environmental impact and the need to maintain your existing land bank without developing new greenfield sites, I hope that you will support your officer's recommendation, as there is no material reason why planning should not be granted. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harrod. Councillor Margaret Phipps, you're the ward councillor. I believe you would like to speak on both applications, taking this one first.
Yes, exactly. I was just going to say, to be clear, I'm only speaking on 820-0016.
That's fine, councillor. That's the one we are dealing with first.
And because some of those representations that have just been done related to the next application as well. So I'll speak to the other one separately. Is that okay?
That's absolutely perfectly fine, councillor.
Okay, so I'm speaking at the moment on 6A, which relates to extending the deadline to 31st of August 2032 for restoration of the original quarry, which includes removing the processing plant. I don't need to really say too much on this, but when permission was granted for the original quarry in 2004, the grant gave a limit of 14 years to complete and restore, taking us to 2018. In August 2018, that was extended, and it's now at December 2031. And here we are again asking for a further extension on top of that to August 2032. Now, I absolutely appreciate that the processing area, which is being used for the quarry extension, will need to remain in place on the original site until all works to the extension are complete. However, local people fail to understand why the remainder of the original quarry cannot be restored to agriculture by the already extended date of December 2031. There are still large areas that have been left excavated, but they're unrestored. It's not visually pleasing. I believe there was a restoration plan being monitored by the County Council. I don't have further information on that or where we are with that. So the original quarry works commenced in 2004, and by 2031, that will be 27 years of this greenbelt site not being fully restored, when it was originally going to be 14 years. I'm often asked by residents why the fields haven't been put back to agriculture as per the original permission. So what I'm asking of the committee today, if they would consider granting the extension to December 2032, but only for the processing plant area located on the original quarry site, which is required for processing the quarry extension, with a condition that the remainder of the original site is restored by the already extended date of December 2031. Now, I realise that December 31 to August 32 may not seem a long time, but locally it is felt that 27 years of works and restoration on a site which was to have taken 14 is long enough. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Phipps. Unfortunately, and I will ask Tanya to confirm this, I am not aware that we are able to make a part recommendation on the particular application, so we would not be able to stipulate that we could only do that part. But Ms. Coulter, I wonder if you could confirm that that is the correct procedure, please. Ms. Coulter?
Sorry, Chairman, I'm just getting my my links up and running. Sorry, Chairman, can you just repeat the query so I'm absolutely clear on what you're asking for?
The question from Councillor Phipps was, she was asking us to consider only making a decision on part of the application, but I'm not aware that we can actually do that. We either have to say yes or no to the entire application. Is that correct?
That's correct, although you can attach conditions to the application if you were able to do it in that way. But I think, unfortunately, you have an application before you have to consider, and then you would have to look at whether any of the, in a sense, conditions surrounding that or constraints or limitations you wanted to put on that could be limited by condition as opposed to splitting the application. So I, without actually going into it in more detail, that's all I can advise at the moment. I don't know whether the officer would like to comment further on that, because it may be that has been considered already and looked, because I think it would be difficult to do it at this late stage, but it may also already have been considered, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Ms. Coulter. Could I ask the officer to come back on that response, please?
Of course, Chairman, thank you. In terms of the monitoring of the site, Councillor Phipps is absolutely correct. The Dorset County Council's enforcement team are monitoring the conditions at present. And I understand from our enforcement team, BCP's enforcement team, they're liaising with, the two teams are speaking to one another, so they are not working in isolation. I would imagine that the reason why the request for an extension of time has come forward is because the applicants want to restore the sites as a whole rather than piecemeal. And whilst I appreciate the point that Councillor Phipps has made, I'd have to agree with Ms. Coulter that we have an application before us which looks at extending a time frame by 8 months, and as we've previously said, your officers are happy to accept that. I can't say that we've discussed the restoration of part of the site with the applicants because we haven't. We've dealt with the application before us, so I'm afraid I'm in the same position as Ms. Coulter on this one. It's not something that we've actually thought about. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for that. So, members, I will come over to you now. Does anyone wish to speak, please? Councillor Bartlett.
Thank you, Chair. Just to follow up on that last discussion, I think it might be a little dangerous to start second guess, whether it can actually be split down like that. There could be technical reasons. There could be all sorts of reasons why it couldn't be done, in separate stages. I don't know. Maybe there's not, but I think it would be inadvisable for us to actually make that judgment. It would be for the applicant, I think, to actually say whether that's actually possible or not. So I think we have to take the application as it stands.
Yeah, fully agree, Councillor. Councillor Hilliard.
Thank you, Chairman. Just looking at the report, just a couple of questions, please, on the consultees. So first of all, the Environment Agency had an initial objection, and then they asked for a survey. Have we had that? And then secondly, on our flooding and coastal erosion team, again, they had no objection, but the comments suggest that there was reports required. And have we had those? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hilliard. Would you like to come back and answer those, please?
Thank you, Chairman. I think the response to those questions is probably more appropriate to the second application, perhaps because that's looking at the wider issue, not of restoration, but of actual mineral winning from the site. But just a kind of a brief response for Councillor Hilliard, the issues raised by both the Lead Flood Authority, which is BCP Council's flooding team, and the Environment Agency are dealt with in the conditions that are attached to the end of the report. So we've not actually asked for that information to be submitted up front. We've obviously made that part of a condition to be dealt with on the recommendation of the two consulting bodies. I don't know if Mr. Badley is still on the line, but if he is, he may be able to offer a little bit more information on that than I can. But certainly I think it's something that maybe we could consider with the second application, if that's acceptable.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Badley, are you online?
Yes, I'm still here. Thank you, Chairman.
Would you like to make any comments to enable the committee? Thank you.
I don't think I have anything further to add, apart from what Kim has said, that there have been there are no standing objections, and if your authority is happy that these issues raised are dealt with through conditions, then I've got nothing to add to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Badley. Appreciate that. So, members, do we have anyone else wishing to speak?
Sorry, Chair, can I just come back with a further question on the the noise was mentioned, and then we've heard from the officer that the generator will be changed to electric supply, which hopefully would reduce the noise, but there's still a pumping noise. Would that could we put a condition that noise would be monitored and controlled? Thank you.
If we just confirm with the officer first on that, Councillor Hilliard. Kim.
Yes.
Could you make any comment on that noise issue? I know that they said they were going to a mains way of doing that.
Thank you, Chairman. The principle of using an electric generator would substantially reduce noise from the site, and the position of the pumping facility would assist greatly. Whilst there isn't a lot of aircraft activity at the moment, I gather that the noise from the pump is lower than that from a plane idling, for want of a better phrase. So as far as we're concerned, the information that we have and the way that has been presented to us, and it's enshrined in a document that forms part of the planning application now, we can control the use of electric pumps in perpetuity, and a noise monitoring situation would be something that the environmental health team could certainly take up if members are concerned. So that's something. There's a twofold control here. It's our planning legislation and the environmental health legislation, which is actually in some circumstances more robust. Thank you, Chair.
So would it be worth considering an informative note to go on this to remind them of their obligations under the noise?
I think that's very fair suggestion, Chairman. It's something we're happy to do.
Thank you very much, Ms. Bowditch. So members, any other members wishing to speak at this moment in time? I've listened and I've read this, and I had the greatest pleasure of spending best part of 13 years on the Minerals and Waste panel over many months, listening to all the sites, and I'm of the opinion that on this one we should allow the 8 months extension to this, and I would be happy to move that in accordance with the recommendations by the officers on conditions, etc., and a note to make sure that they are fully aware of their obligations under the Noise Act. Councillor Bartlett.
Second, Chairman.
Councillor Bartlett?
Yes, happy to second that, Chair.
Thank you very much on that. If there are no other speakers, I will move straight to the vote on this one. And I will start by, again, calling your names and asking you to state for or against. Councillor Barron.
For.
Councillor Bartlett.
For.
Councillor Mike Brook.
For.
Councillor Simon Bull.
For.
Councillor Malcolm Davies.
For.
Councillor Peter Hall.
For.
Councillor Paul Hilliard.
For.
Councillor Toby Johnson.
For.
Councillor Marion Lepodovin.
For.
Councillor Bob Lawton.
For.
Councillor Tony O'Neill.
For.
Councillor Ann Stribley.
For.
And myself as chairman, Councillor Kelsey, I also am for. Could we have the numbers on that, please, Mr. Harrod?
Yes, of course, Chairman. That's unanimous.
Thank you very much. So application A is granted with conditions and the informative note added. We will now move on to the second of the two applications for Herne Quarry, which is 6B. And again, I would ask Kim if you could please come back jinx free and present the next application.
I'll do my very best. Thank you, Chairman. The second application, again relating to Herne Quarry before you this afternoon, seeks consent to effectively extend mineral working below the water table. So you've had an extensive report, the bulk of which actually relates to this application, it has to be said. Fundamentally, planning consent having originally been given for the existing quarry and for the western extension, plans in front of you, the decision was taken to allow workings above the water table, so nothing below. And the reasons for that are set out in the report. Essentially, the applicants now seek to unsterilise I think it's 300 or a little over 300,000 tonnes of mineral aggregate that are below the water table, because obviously they are looking at long-term aggregate such as this, particularly as councillors have pointed out, particularly in the light of current government push to enhance the development industry and make sure that we keep Britain ticking along. Obviously, these minerals are very important. Road construction and other development proposals, you've heard from the applicant and their agent that they have been used locally. So essentially 300,000 tonnes of material sterilised by a planning condition is not helpful. In approving any application for, or in assessing any application for development of this kind in an area such as this, where there are obviously environmental concerns, there are biodiversity concerns, there are concerns with regards to the water table, flooding, there are concerns with regards to disturbance and the impact on residential amenities, and in this instance on a heritage asset. Dale's House is a listed building. Those all feature in the report before you, and they've been examined in some detail. And whilst it's accepted that there will be some impact from this development, because by its nature, mineral working is not, as Councillor Phipps has already pointed out, a particularly attractive business, it is nonetheless a necessary one, and a balance has to be struck between a short-term development. 2032 is effectively short-term in the life of any built form or any development, and actually protecting the building industry and moving along with the requirements of planning guidance, which are that we should have a 7-year supply of aggregate material throughout the lifetime of the authority. It is a very difficult balance to strike, but in this instance we have fallen on the side of an advisory or a suggestion to members that they actually approve consent. I would like to draw members' attention to the fact that as part of this aggregate winning application, there is a proposed lagoon on site which will take water. It's a dewatering facility effectively. That lagoon will be pumped, that's what the generator's for, and will then drain into neighbouring watercourses. And again, that's set out in your report, and the actual watercourses that will be affected are identified. I'm aware that Councillor Phipps will have more to say about that, and I'll back off now and allow the debate to continue. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Kim. So again, I will revert to Mr. Harrod. Mr. Harrod, do you have any statements to read, please?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Ultimately, the statements that were read in relation to the previous planning application ultimately straddle this application too. So if you and the committee members are content, I don't see a need to reread them.
Thank you. I will just check with committee members. Committee members, are you all quite happy for that to be the case, not to read the statements again?
Yes, thank you, Chairman.
Yes, yeah, thank you very much. I will, however, ask Councillor Margaret Phipps if she would like to now focus us with her second deputation. Councillor Phipps.
Thank you very much. This is now for item 6B. I first say residents and Herne Parish Council fully appreciate the need for minerals. And generally, as I know Mr. Flower would tell you, we do have a good relationship with the applicant, but I just would like to raise two issues. One of them already mentioned, noise from a proposed diesel generator, which will be used to continuously pump water on the site. The affected residents will be two separate households at listed Dale's House, immediately adjoining the quarry. The applicant agrees that they will use mains power instead of diesel to fuel the generator. This is welcomed, thank you. However, the application still says diesel, which emanates emissions and noise, and all I ask for is a condition that mains power must be used for the dewatering pump and not diesel. Now, the second thing is potential flooding to the public footpath, wildlife meadow, and potential damage to mature trees. I did send information to aid my explanation relating to the route of proposed water discharge from the quarry. That's the map on the screen. Every map, as on the screen, within the report shows a lagoon in the west of the quarry, with discharge water channeled west on the site, under Dales Lane, to a discharge point, then directed west again, south along the public footpath, Muddy Lane, and then east along the southern stream heading outwards. It is not clear on any of these maps that further east along the southern stream is a dam which will restrict the flow of water and we consider potentially cause flooding. Neither of the two hydrology and flood risk reports, 22nd of November 2019, submitted with the application, identify or even mention the existence of the dam in the southern stream or existing flooding issues in Marytown Wood and Marytown Lane, which are the norm in the winter. Therefore, I believe the evidence for the proposed location of the water discharge from the site is flawed. I did send a photo showing the footpath tellingly known as Muddy Lane in rainy winter conditions. I emailed a Plan 1 showing Marytown Wood and Muddy Lane to the west, together with a location of the flooded duck pond and dam on the southern stream to the east, and also noted a specimen oak and some lime trees which could possibly be damaged by flood by the water being discharged upstream of the dam. I also marked on Plan 1 the natural flow location for water discharge from the quarry into the southern stream, which of course is east below the dam. And there does exist from the first quarry application, the quarry extension application, a surface water management scheme from September 2018, which shows a drainage ditch should be installed running eastwards towards a lagoon located in the southeastern corner of the quarry site, not in the west as on the proposed application. And I sent round a plan showing that lagoon shaded green. The 2018 report correctly identified the natural south and easterly groundwater surface water flows. And the report also shows a discharge pipeline from that eastern lagoon directly to the southern stream, most importantly downstream of the dam. And that was shown on that map. And this sensible scheme appears to have been abandoned in favour of the current proposal. So to summarise, the proposed dewatering water discharge in this application before you drains westward alongside Dales Lane, which is against the natural water flow. Water is then channelled to the ditch alongside Muddy Lane, then discharged into the southern stream upstream of the dam, which I believe will clearly exacerbate existing flooding issues, especially in the winter. Discharge should be downstream of the dam to avoid flooding to Marytown Wood, Muddy Lane, public footpath, and the wildlife meadow, which is used for grazing. I'm told locally that the gradient from the proposed discharge point upstream of the dam to the Leaden Stour and River Stour, where the water will all eventually end up, is only around 18 inches. And therefore the potential for flooding between that discharge point and the main rivers is huge and doesn't seem to have been given any consideration. The presence of the dam in the southern stream is not mentioned or recognised in the hydrology and flood risk reports. Now, condition 13 addresses hydrology, but there's no mention of the potential wider landscape impact of the location of the proposed water discharge. And you must only consider the application before you, where all maps show the same discharge location. And I'm hoping this won't just be granted with the condition being monitoring water levels, because I don't think that's good enough. The principle of mineral extraction is not disputed. However, there has to be responsible regard for its impact, protection of the landscape, mature trees and flood risk. And I believe this could be refused as being contrary to policies HE3, ME6 and ME7 of the Christchurch Core Strategy. Alternatively, if you are minded to grant, then can I suggest a condition that before any permission is issued or work commenced on site, there should be a complete review of the location of the water discharge point, the hydrology and flood situation, the impact on specimen trees. This is a beautiful, natural, rural area of BCP, and I don't want to see it spoilt. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Phipps. I would ask the officer, Kim, if there is anything that you've heard from Councillor Phipps that you would like to come back on at this time.
Thank you, Chairman. I appreciate the point that Councillor Phipps has made. I actually walked the site with Councillor Phipps earlier on this week, and I understand from the photographs that she submitted and from the conversation we've had, I fully understand her point. As Mr. Hodges has just pointed out, Condition 3 of the Planning Permission requires the submission of further details with regards to the water table and so on. We could expand that condition to require details to be submitted if that would help. Or alternatively, if Councillor, I mean, obviously it's for members to determine whether or not, if they are minded to grant this planning application, they wish to attach the caveat that it will only be granted subject to the hydrology issues being resolved to our satisfaction in concert with the Flood Mitigation Authority and the Environment Agency. Thank you, Chairman.
I actually think, Kim, if that were the case to be granted, I would be fully supportive of that particular condition that you have just mentioned being added to this. I think it's imperative that we get this right. Yeah. And I think Councillor Phipps is absolutely right. If we are going to grant it, there does need to be that condition on this. So I would be fully supportive in you wording that condition in accordance with what you have just stated.
Thanks. Okay.
Members, would there anyone like to come back, please? Councillor O'Neill.
Yeah, similar to what you've just said, Chairman, I am concerned about the need for a robust flood management scheme and also dealing with the water discharge. And I'd like to say that I think Councillor Phipps' condition or suggestion of condition is entirely appropriate. If approval is to be given, that condition must be included. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Neill. Councillor Lepodovin, I see that you are also in agreement with that condition being added. Councillor Bartlett.
Thank you, Chair. It's a bit concerning, really. The issues raised by Councillor Phipps are fairly significant. You know, the drainage of this water away from and the emission of or non-recognition of the dam, etc., and the potential impact on it. But having said that, I think the condition as outlined would help, and I think on that basis, provide that condition was included, I'd be happy to move to grant the application.
Thank you, Councillor Bartlett. May I get a seconder for Councillor Bartlett's move, please?
Councillor O'Neill would second that.
Thank you very much, Councillor O'Neill. Councillor Bull.
There was also, thank you, Chair, there was also a second condition suggested by Councillor, sorry, my mind's gone blank, regarding the diesel generator being used from the electric mains. Is that condition included in the proposal?
I will check with the officer on that. I believe that the diesel generator has actually been removed and it's now going to be run off mains, but I will check with Ms Bowditch about that. Ms Bowditch?
That's correct, Chairman. Yes, the proposal now is to use an electric generator. There is no reason why we could not expand one of the existing conditions or add a new one to the effect that the information submitted with regards generators is adhered to in perpetuity. That's something that we're happy to add.
I think if that eases the minds of the members of the committee, I think that also, whilst not wishing to add too many conditions to any planning application, I think in this instance, with the environment impact of this, I think that would be a credible condition to add. Thank you.
Thank you.
May I please take this opportunity, members, to ask Councillor Phipps if she is happy for us to include those conditions. I know this is not a normal practice, but I think this is such an environmental issue. I would be grateful for her comment back on that.
Yes. Yeah, thank you very, very much, Chairman and Committee. Yes, I would be happy with the conditions. I just wonder what the condition about the hydrology would be, whether it was what Kim said, because I didn't write it down, or whether it's what I'm saying. I just wonder if someone could just clarify the wording, but I'm very happy for both the noise and the other condition. Thank you very much. Thank you.
No, thank you very much, Councillor Phipps. Councillor Stribley.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a quick one. Well, I'm really glad they have agreed to take out the generator. I would suggest the generator should not necessarily be removed from the site, but in the event of severe weather and a power cut, the generator might actually, in an emergency, save environmental damage. So I wouldn't want to say there shouldn't be one on site, but that perhaps should only be used in an emergency.
I tend to agree. I think having it removed off site is not really within our remit, and I think it would also, as you quite rightly say, be sensible to keep a backup system to make sure that there is no damage done to the environment in case of accidents or misdemeanours.
Thank you, Chair.
Ms Bowditch, could you repeat the condition that you suggested, please, so that all members may hear it?
Indeed, Chairman. It really was not so much a condition that was suggested, but that perhaps if members were minded to grant this planning permission, that prior to that decision being issued, the hydrology issues were sorted, for want of a better phrase, to our satisfaction, together with the Environment Agency and the Lead Flood Authority. I think conditioning condition 3 of the that's set out in your papers could then be revisited to enhance the wording, to include reference to approved plans that perhaps came forward as part of those discussions. Whilst I'm not interested in I recognise that there is a level of urgency to winning minerals and aggregate. We do need to address the hydrology issues, and I think if we have information before us that is not entirely looking at the enclosing area and the impact of the development, then that needs to be addressed before a planning permission is issued. I'll stand corrected if anybody else, if my colleagues or anyone else is opposed to that, but it seems to be the appropriate way forward.
Thank you, Ms Bowditch. May I ask if any other officers have any comments to make regarding that before we go forward with the move to grant?
Chairman, if it just helps
yes,
quickly.
Please.
Yes, first of all, I just wanted to confirm that it would be straightforward for us to add an addition to condition 9, which deals with noise issues in terms of the generator. And likewise, we would agree with yourselves that it'd be prudent to be able to use a diesel generator in an emergency rather than have that cause more damage by that facility not being available, but the expectation would be that this is not typically used, and we can find a wording to add to condition 9. And just in support of Kim's response there, were the matter to be delegated to the head of planning to resolve those issues, we can resolve those issues in conjunction with the ward member so that the Councillor Phipps is clear on the agreed solution for dealing with the drainage issues before a planning permission is issued. I think we can be confident that a solution is available, and we can work through that detail of that to ensure that the issues that Councillor Phipps has raised are properly taken into account by the applicant before a planning permission is granted. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr Hodges. I really appreciate that, and I'm sure that Councillor Phipps will appreciate being kept in the loop on that, as it is her ward. Councillor Stribley, you wish to come back?
No, Chairman, sorry, I was going to try and cancel that request. My query has been answered. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. In that case, I will go to the vote on this. We have a move to grant, and that has been duly seconded. I will again call your names, and if you could answer for or against, please. So, Councillor Barron?
For.
Councillor Bartlett?
For.
Councillor Mike Brooke?
For.
Councillor Simon Bull?
For.
Councillor Malcolm Davies?
For.
Councillor Peter Hall?
For.
Councillor Paul Hilliard?
For.
Councillor Toby Johnson?
For.
Councillor Marion Lepodovin?
For.
Councillor Bob Lawton?
For.
Councillor Tony O'Neill?
For.
Councillor Ann Stribley?
For.
And myself, Councillor Kelsey, also for. Could I have the numbers, please, Mr Harrod?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Once again, we are unanimous on that. So 13 for and 0 against and 0 abstentions.
Thank you very much, Ms Hubbard. And may I say thank you to Councillor Phipps for all the information that she sent through to the board members beforehand on this one, and for the officers. I know it's a very dodgy one when anything environmental comes up in front of us like that. So thank you to everyone. We will now move on. As we know, 6E has been withdrawn. We will now move on to 6F, which is 72 Lincoln Road, and I would ask Mr. Evans to prepare the screens for us, please.
Thank you, Chairman. If you can perhaps just confirm that you have the presentation.
I do indeed, Mr. Evans.
Thank you. Chairman, retrospective application, flat roof single story extension to a bungalow, some outbuildings to it, some rethinking, raising of the roof with higher eaves, and some new boundary treatments. So basically alterations of extension to an existing bungalow. Just put you into the context of the location. Herbert Avenue, Alder Road are perhaps two key thoroughfares that members might help to use to orientate themselves to where this is within the borough. More specifically, an existing bungalow flanked by a bungalow at 74 and a two-storey house at 70, which reflects the mixed character of the street as it is now. It's not a homogeneous street. There is a variety of architectural styles and size, one and two-storey houses, bungalows. I'd also take this opportunity to draw attention to the normal suburban mix of outbuildings and incidental buildings in the gardens of the houses round about. I also draw attention to the orientation, effectively a southwesterly aspect on the rear of the property. Also, what's not apparent from that is a significant fall in levels from Lincoln Road down to the rear in Fortescue Road, which are the homes that back onto the site in this position. So, street scene, draw attention July 2019, and I draw attention to some of the works on the bungalow having at that time already commenced. And that's an opportune time to remind committee, as if you needed reminding, that of course this application is at least in part retrospective, should have no bearing whatsoever on your consideration of the merit of the proposals. It is not material that some of the works have already been commenced, and some of them are quite advanced, but as I say, that has no bearing on the context of the application or on the consideration of the application. So again, just to reiterate that point, mixed character, number 74 still a bungalow, 72 bungalow will remain a bungalow, but two-storey houses roundabout it forming part of the streetscape and the character. The proposals would re-roof the existing bungalow, which currently extends into this area, but would extend further, this being a single-storey element to the rear of the bungalow. A narrow terrace, which will become apparent in terms of its context when I show you some elevations, steps down to a lower terrace, further steps down to the lower level of the garden, and some outbuildings within the curtilage at the rear, all incidental to the dwelling. So a more formal approach to the otherwise sloping garden, and that will become apparent in some of the photographs I'll show you. So moving to the actual proposals, the ridge of the building, the roof of the building having effectively been raised by increasing the height of the eaves. I'm just drawing your attention to where the roof eaves previously sat at the top of the bay windows at the front of the property, now raised up above that. To the rear, the single-storey extension to the rear, and then the series of steps down and a more formal approach to this sloping rear garden. I will show you some photographs of the works that have already been undertaken in a moment. Put that into context in terms of the cross-section. So, the original bungalow, and you can pick up some of the detail of that from the shading, so the lifting of the eaves height, the extension to the rear, a narrow terrace at floor level, and with the access down proceeding down the garden, new boundary treatment at the end of the garden, which is a slightly retaining element to it, or retaining aspect to it, and the outbuildings incidental to the dwelling. Again, seeing it from the other side, the same issues. There is, in one of the drawings, photographs I'll show you, some footings and some works in respect of a further extension to the side of the property. Let me just take you back to that floor plan, which would have put an extension into this area. This is no longer part of this application. It was one of the bits of work that had commenced without the benefit of permission, and this application does not address that, and the intention is that that will be removed. So again, moving back to that footprint, the narrow terrace outside of the principal habitable rooms with the aspect to the southwest, steps down to the lower levels, as you can see from the narrow terrace, which I suggest is not a usable terrace or amenity space because of its width, and the access is then down to the lower levels. Put some images of that. So as I suggested, raising the eaves height above where the original eaves height was, above where it previously sat at the top of the bay windows or the twin bay windows at the front. And this is where you can perhaps appreciate why there have been some concerns about this development having proceeded without the benefit of planning permission, although the works have stopped since the planning department has been engaging with the applicants to resolve any permissions that were needed. It does have a somewhat stark appearance, and I think you have to look beyond the works that have been started in terms of the outbuildings, again in terms of the rear single-story rear extension and the narrow terrace that would sit outside of the doors onto that area. And again, as I say, a slight stark appearance currently, but you know, like all works in progress, that would be more mellow, and I would suggest it will, on completion and on the basis of the drawings that you're considering, will have a much more domestic appearance than the building site that it currently is when it's completed. Again, the view beyond to the properties lower down the hill, let's say at Fortescue Road beyond, there will be new boundary treatment in there which will afford improved retention of some of the level changes and will provide more of a boundary screen. Again, the views from the higher level of the terrace, again, the benefit of it being partly retrospective, it's possible to put it in the context rather than having to visualize the context entirely. And I would suggest that the relationship to everything around about it would not give rise to any meaningful loss of amenity or any harm in terms of privacy or overlooking, in terms of overshadowing. And again, I remind you the orientation, that view is in this image is effectively to the southeast. I draw attention to the levels relative to the existing boundary treatment in terms of any increased shading that may be experienced beyond that boundary. And I suggest that the proposals wholly respect the amenities, not just that property, but also the adjoining property to the southeast. Again, this is the foundation that was previously put in place to accommodate a side extension that is no longer part of this application, and again should therefore be disregarded as far as a consideration of this application. So a scheme that is in part retrospective, but a scheme that is nevertheless domestic in scale, wholly in keeping with the character of the street, can be delivered without harm to the amenities, privacy, outlook, shading, daylight, sunlight of any adjacent property. The application, therefore, Chairman, is recommended for approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. I will go over to Mr. Harrod for any statements he has to read out. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just the one statement received to object from a Elizabeth McGee, who states the rear boundary forms part of this application is detailed in point 17 and shown on the proposed side elevation. I am concerned that the details, however, are insufficient. The plans show an RC wall just short of 3 meters high, topped with a fence of 1 meter, which will be necessary to screen my house and garden from the development. There is no mention of the appearance or structure of the wall, and it is my opinion that this is part of the planning application. Consideration should be given to the appearance in the same way as it is to the house. It is also of concern that access for construction of this wall is now limited on both sides. Can a condition of approval of this application be added, requiring details of how the boundary is to be achieved to the height of the boundary with 70 Lincoln Road, given that an RC wall has already been installed to a height of 2 meters, which is 1.8 meters short of the total height required on the plan, and which has already proved structurally flawed since it has bowed and cracked. This wall was installed without consultation with me at the beginning of the development and before planning permission was applied for. I would like assurance that the flawed wall will be removed. Adequate screening of the development is very important to me. Before the development started, my garden ended in a green screen of conifer tree, high privet hedge on our shared boundary, and low retaining wall, all of which were removed by the developer without any consultation with me. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harrod. I believe we have Councillor Millie Earl with us this afternoon as Ward Councillor. Councillor Earl, would you like to speak, please?
Yes, please. Thank you very much, Chair. Committee members, here we have another planning application which is brought based on the unusual topography of the very hilly Newtown and Heavlands ward. The main issue with this development, and the reason I've brought it to you today, is the insufficiency of the plan submitted. The very point of planning is to assess impact visually, environmentally, socially and economically. Policy PP27 of the local plan states that a good standard of design in all new development is required, and this policy seeks to ensure that development exhibits a high standard of design by respecting the setting and character of the site and surrounding area and adjoining buildings by the virtue of its layout and sitting, including building line and built site coverage, height and scale, bulk and massing, including that of the roof, materials and detailing, landscaping and visual impact. This retrospective application, though, it fails to show the detail that would allow the public and indeed the committee to make a well-informed judgment on the impact of neighbouring amenity and how it can sufficiently be weighed against the demands of the local plan and policy PP27. The south boundary of the property is just one example of an element of insufficient planning, yet will have a significant impact on the amenity of the residents of number 4 Fortescue Road and the use of their garden. Before work commenced on 72 Lincoln Road, the garden sloped down towards the garden of 4 Fortescue Road, where the boundary was marked with a privet hedge. When work commenced without planning permission, the privet hedge was removed and a large concrete retaining wall was installed with the intention of getting rid of the slope and aligning 72 Lincoln Road's garden to the rest of that level. According to the officer's report, there is no known fundamental reason why the site cannot accommodate the proposed development in a manner that would not lead to the instability of the land or of adjacent land. However, the concrete wall is now bowed and cracked and will need to be removed as it could not hold the weight of the soil behind it, which then begs the question, what will be in its place? How will the soil be secured? And is it even possible to get a decent, strong boundary into position considering the site layout in terms of access? Without being flippant, I'd argue that the fundamental reason why tons of soil cannot be held up against a flat wall that does not have bearings in the adjacent garden is that, well, gravity exists and doesn't allow for these mighty changes in landmass on a very steep hill. The planning officer report includes a high boundary treatment and a new rear boundary treatment and shows the levelling of the lower ground, but there is no description of what materials will be used, what it will look like or how it will impact the neighbours to the stand, therefore leaving neighbours unable to comment on the look and feel of a potential monstrosity in their garden and living in fear of the boundary treatment collapsing due to the weight of the soil, which is not part of the natural topography of a steep hill that the property sits on. It simply does not respect the character of the site or the virtue of the current natural layout. It doesn't describe the materials and detailing, landscaping and visual impact, which are all required through PP27 and the local plan. Another example is the topography and building height, which is not true to the application. Shells of these buildings have already been built and don't line up with the application, particularly on the west side boundary. So an example of this is the games room, which currently is built to a higher than the west boundary fence. However, the plan says it will be 1 metre lower than the fence. It could be that the applicant is willing to remove a metre from the height, but then that would surely mean the games room is not going to be high enough to stand in. The lack of true land topography means that fence and wall heights do not correspond at all with elevations. Fence panels and brickwork are not true to the existing form, and there's no attempt to explain exactly how it will look for the neighbours to the west, therefore denying them the opportunity to comment on the plans. So just to clarify, this application is not strongly opposed, but that's because the application is inaccurate and incomplete. The very point of having a planning system is to assess impact, democratically involving residents and communities in these decisions. However, this application needs clarity if it is to be in line with, if it is to be permitted in line with the local plan and particularly paragraph PP27. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Earl. Mr. Evans, would you like to come back on anything that you have heard so far?
Yes, Chairman, just to pick up a couple of things. The question of land stability, the report says that there is no fundamental reason or known fundamental reason why the land might be unstable. When we say fundamental, we mean in terms of sinkholes, mine shafts, whatever, things that would make it fundamentally incapable of supporting development. most land is capable of supporting development. It's just a question of how much structure you have to put into it to do that. In this particular case, as ever, it is the onus is on the developer or the applicant to ensure that they carry out works in a manner that don't give rise to instability on their site or in respect of any adjoining land. So the onus would be on the developer to provide a retaining structure as shown on the plans being considered in a manner that would do the job that it was intended for. I take the council's point about the appearance of the wall. It's a substantial structure potentially at the bottom of the garden, but I'd suggest it's a significant distance from the adjacent houses in Fortescue Road, and it's not immediately imposing in relation to the rear aspect of those houses. A condition that required, whilst there's a condition already proposed in the recommendation before you about the materials to proceed in accordance with the approved plan, I'd be quite content for that to go beyond that in terms of final details of the appearance of the retaining structure. I would not wish the council be put in a position of having to make a judgment on the structural soundness of that structure. That's a matter for others to consider, and it's primarily a matter for the developer or the applicant to consider. Compliance with plans. The difficulty with this application is, it's why I made a point about the side extension, the small building that some works were commenced on, or the small extension to the side where some works were commenced. The drawings that you see before you are not necessarily compliant with what's on the ground. This is the solution that's been brought forward to deal with the issues that have been identified as concerns with the works that had previously been undertaken. So, for instance, if I could just highlight this part of the ancillary incidental room furthest down the garden, if I can perhaps take you to a photograph. And in fact, while we're there, if I could just draw your attention to the boundary treatment that runs across here and then down, and the height of that relative to that. If I can take you to a photograph of that area, that I believe some of the height of that building has already been removed out of it, and if we look at the oblique images, you'll see that works have already been done to take it down to that level. So this level is the building that's on the drawings. So going back to that drawing. So we're at that building, and that represents the current boundary treatment. So it's not in all respects, and similarly there are works in there which do not form part of this application, would not be permitted if you're managed to approve this application. So this is an end state that's an application. It doesn't necessarily reflect all of the unauthorised or unpermitted, so far unpermitted works have already been undertaken. This is an end state, and we've judged, or we're making a recommendation based on the proposals on the drawings in front of you, which don't necessarily correspond exactly with the works on the ground. So the presumption would be, because of the engagement of our enforcement colleagues who have brought this application to this stage, essentially by their engagement early, last year when the works commenced, this would permit a form of development that reflects the works already done, reflects the aspirations of the applicant, but as an acceptable form of development, omitting areas of development that might otherwise have been proceeding before the engagement of the planning department. So I think, as I say, it's unfortunate that there are images to look at of what's there now, because they are in some respects slightly misleading in terms of exactly what which of this is within the planning application that you're considering today. It does give you some indication, but that's not what you're approving. You're approving what's on the drawing, which largely similar, but in some key respects, like the height of certain parts of it, is significantly different. Chairman, I'm still content, other than, as I say, if the committee were minded to put a condition on about the retaining wall, I would encourage that if the committee felt it necessary, that was merely to address the appearance and materials of the wall, and not to address its capability in terms of retaining the amount of earth that's being proposed. But there is no reason why a structure retaining that height of earth with its structure wholly within the curtilage of the applicant's land. There's no reason why that couldn't be achieved on this site. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Mr. Evans, if I may, I just have a quick question for you. I went to visit the site yesterday, and my immediate concern was the roof at the front on the actual bungalow. Have the eaves been raised on that? I know it's not necessarily part of this application, but my reason for saying that is, looking at the building, the property to the left of that building, the eaves on the front part of this bungalow are now actually directly above the eaves of the next door neighbour. Now, they have drainage put in on the roof. There is no downpipe in there yet, and looking at that building, there is no room to put a downpipe, as their overflow pipes are directly above the overflow of the property next door, and I can see there being rather a few disputes about water going over buildings and things like that. I just wondered if you could enlighten me on that one.
I probably can't get down to that level of detail for you, I'm afraid, Chairman, but clearly disposal of surface water would be a matter addressed under the building regulations, and clearly there may, if you're saying there is a potential encroachment by water across the boundary, if proper drain, rainwater, stormwater goods aren't installed, that would be, I'm afraid, a civil matter. We can't get down to that level of detail in considering the merits of the application. If I can just take you to that point about the height of the eaves, if I can find the right image. I take your point that previously the eaves sat at this level. You can see a clear break in the fabric where the previous render stops, and in the earlier images you can see that the soffit sat immediately above this element. So I'd suggest that what's happened is it's gone up vertically by that, but my reading of the images is it has not projected any further laterally towards or beyond the boundary than the previous rainwater goods on the roof would have done. So if we can go back to that side-by-side comparison of the front elevation, the point I'm making is that while it's gone up vertically, that detail is essentially the same as this detail here. So no further encroachment beyond or towards the boundary. And my understanding was that there was a small setback from the boundary anyway in terms of the site plan. So I can't add anything more to that, I'm afraid, yeah.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Evans. Councillor Bartlett.
I looked at that last night as well, Chair. The rainwater gutter actually takes it not over the adjacent property, but on the exact border line. They are actually aligned. There's no gap between them. Although it's higher, it is not overlapping, and it's actually on the border line. The downpipe from the gutters would come down vertically from the gutter, and then would turn back into the line into the property site. So whilst it's very, very close, and it could give some problems in terms of maintenance, etc., it's not a planning issue. And any encroachment, if it is there, would be a civil matter as well, I believe.
Thank you, Councillor Bartlett. I appreciate your input on that one. Councillor Stribley, had you put an RTS in?
Yes, Chairman.
Please go ahead.
If we're in the debate.
We are indeed.
I'm absolutely with the ward councillor on the point she raises on this issue. And I would just want some assurances, because what we see as the proposal against the outline of the existing is, I think, pretty unsightly sideways on. We now have a proposal for a large flat roofed area. So, and there have been a number of issues within the area of Newtown Heatherlands ward where there has been use of flat roofs as suddenly they become balconies or whatever. So I'd be very concerned if there were any potential access to that roofing. I'm worried by looking at what we've been shown. Certainly we were shown a whitish fence, new looking. I guess this was the replacement for the privet hedge, which looked rather low. What was the other side then? that one looked rather low. And looking at one of the site plans at the rear boundary, it looks as though the ground level has been raised by at least a metre behind that fencing there, if you look on the bottom left of that picture. And I am concerned by the comments that whatever's been put in there, that structure is already failing. But if they are raising the level by using it as a dumping ground for any of the soil and spoil that's been excavated, then they're potentially putting the property below at risk. And I don't think you can say it's not our problem. I do think there should be a condition that that rear ground level adjacent to the properties in Fortescue Road should not be raised. I don't think that would be a problem at all. The whole thing looks a mess, but I accept that tidied up and finished properly, there is probably not much we can do about it. I would like assurance that from no point on the terrace or the decking, whatever they're putting in there, will there be substantial overlooking of either of the adjacent properties. Because all these small houses and homes, we all have our nice private garden, but if you have somebody sitting above you looking straight down in yours, that would be extremely off-putting. So yes, while you can see other properties, I don't think there should be any, if you like, seating space that looks straight down into the neighbours. So I am concerned with the boundary treatment, and I do think it's a matter for planning, because building regs in effect comes under planning, that I think we need to raise the issue there that it's carefully looked at and safe for the neighbours. But on the other hand, I would think the sooner this eyesore is completed and turned into a decent home, the better for everybody. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Stribley. Mr. Evans and possibly Ms. Coulter, I wonder if you can respond to this, and also just remind members as to what is and what is not the responsibility of us as a planning board in regards to some aspects of this. Is it us as a planning board to dictate to building regs, etc., about the strength of these types of walls? I think it would be a good point to clarify, please.
Absolutely, Chairman.
Chairman,
just pick up.
Sorry, I wasn't suggesting we dictate, but I was suggesting we refer it for special attention.
Thank you.
Chairman, let me pick up one of the other points that Councillor Stribley made first, which was about the risk of the flat roof being used as a terrace. That doesn't form part of this application. Any future proposal to use that roof as a terrace, which seems improbable, but you can never rule it out, would currently require an application for planning permission. So I think that is a concern that we can, for now, set aside. It may be the subject of something a later day, but there is no proposal or suggestion, nor any means of access out onto it. We would normally only attach conditions if there was an implicit expectation that it was going to be used as a terrace. I'd suggest that isn't the case in this one. In terms of the retaining structure, I think planning can very properly engage in the amenity implications of retaining structures, how they may be overbearing or how they might overshadow or otherwise have a bearing on the amenities enjoyed by an adjacent resident, which was my point about we could perhaps look further at the materials to make sure that it was an appropriate domestic solution, domestic in inverted commas, within the character of a domestic garden and not an overly engineered solution. But I would not want the council, and certainly not want planning, to become involved in taking a view on the efficacy of the scheme as designed. I would not want the council to, certainly not planning, to be taking a position about whether the engineering aspects of the structure were fit for purpose, because clearly we would then, having opined on its suitability and capability for the purpose intended, would then take some responsibility going forward. It's not a matter for planning. I'm not convinced that building regulations would necessarily get involved in that because of the nature and scale of it. But I have to keep coming back to the fact and to the point that the guidance that we work to place makes it very clear that it is very much in the onus of anyone carrying out any building operations on land to ensure that they do so in a manner that does not harm or prejudice the stability of their own land or of any other adjacent land. So it puts the responsibility firmly on the person undertaking the work, and it's not something that we should get involved in the detail or opine on the suitability or efficacy of what's being proposed for that purpose. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Councillor Potovin.
Thank you, Chair. As one of the other ward councillors for Newtown and Heatherlands, this has been I've been aware of this as an ongoing concern particularly for the resident below on the road behind on Fortescue Road for a considerable time, particularly for the overbearing visual context of the extension, and particularly the rear wall, whatever that should be, but also the structure, the stability of it. I take Mr. Evans' point that is the responsibility of the developer, but that's not much comfort to the person in the house behind if it collapses and the ground cascades down all over their garden. Hopefully not as far as the house, but who knows? You know, it seems a very weak response to say, oh well, it was their responsibility. Tough that you suffered. You'll have to rely on your insurance company to pick up the tab. That doesn't seem good enough to me. But I take, if that's the legal situation, so be it. Maybe the law needs amending in some way. But I would hope that whatever can be done to draw attention to the developer and the applicant that anything done in that area must not only be visually acceptable, but must be structurally able to do the job, that is pointed out to them loud and clear. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Potovin. Councillor Bartlett.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of points. First, regarding the retaining wall at the bottom, I think the officer's got this absolutely right. You know, I think a condition sort of making sure that officers are content with the appearance of the wall is exactly the right thing to do. The second point is on the one that Councillor Stribley raised about the potential for using the flat roof for a terrace of some sort. Now, whilst I understand that that we're only looking at what's before us, and there's no intent in the plans to show it being used as a balcony or as a terrace, we do on occasion put in conditions preventing the use of permitted development. Now, in this case, it is potentially the roof conversion could be carried out under permitted development, in which case it is possible that it could lead onto that flat roof. Now, if we wanted to be absolutely certain about stopping the roof from being used for, a patio or whatever, a balcony or a terrace, that would then give considerable overlooking to the adjoining properties, it might be that we could introduce another condition preventing the use of permitted development in any change to the roof structure. I'd be interested to see what the planning officer says about that. He may think it's unnecessary, but I just throw it in because who knows what's going to happen in the future regarding this development. So perhaps the planning officer would like to answer that.
Thank you, Councillor Bartlett. Mr. Evans.
Thank you, Chair. I think Councillor Bartlett may have touched on a pertinent point. Currently, and I was pains to say, currently it would require planning permission. Anything, any alterations or extensions that include a balcony or terrace would require planning permission under the current GPDO. However, things are changing quite quickly at the minute in terms of what does and does not constitute permitted development, and clearly as the system evolves and changes in the times that we currently are, it may well be, and you could not rule out the possibility of that not requiring permission at some point in the future. If in the mind of the committee the permission would turn on whether there should or should not be the use of that flat roof in the future for that purpose. It may be expedient to attach a condition requiring not to be used. I think it's going perhaps beyond what's required today. It's certainly going beyond what's required today. But because of the as I say, the way the system is evolving very quickly in terms of what is and is not permitted development, it might be expedient to attach it to avoid that possibility in the future. And I would have no, since it doesn't prejudice any of the proposals before you for consideration, I'd be content to add that as an extra condition.
Thank you for that advice, Mr. Evans. Appreciate that.
Can I come back on that, please, Chair?
Yes, please do, Councillor Bartlett.
In that case, I think I would be prepared to make a move to grant, subject to those two conditions being added. One regarding the appearance of the rear retaining wall, and also the removal of permitted development for the roof structure.
I personally think that condition would be very acceptable to everyone. I think it's quite important, and I thank you for raising that point, Councillor Bartlett. Councillor Hilliard.
Thank you. Yes, I'm happy to second that, but just clarify, please, the officer, on condition 3, the 1.8 screening is only to one side. I just can't understand why it's not to both sides.
If I can perhaps... Yes, sorry, I think the mic is on. If I can perhaps take you back to the context of that, a boundary to the adjacent bungalow, the boundary to the adjacent two-storey house, the patio doors from which there will be egress onto this area. I'd suggest that since it requires it to be along the eastern side, which is this side, I'd suggest it's not necessary to the western side. Let me just take you perhaps to that floor plan. So because of the relationship of that terrace to the boundary and to this property, screening there, whereas screening here would serve very little purpose, given that there is an equivalence of level across there. I think that's the sensitive point because of the egress from the patio doors here, the natural desire line down the stairs down to the lower terraces, and I think it's right that that area requires to be addressed for screening, but I don't think that would serve any great purpose. Let me just take you to a photograph that perhaps captures some of that. So the screening is into this area where it's very close to the boundary, but in terms of the other side, bear in mind that screen would be somewhere in this position. I'd suggest that it would serve no useful purpose in terms of screening in that position. And clearly, if it turns on that and the committee so will it, I wouldn't see it as being a condition that's wholly untenable, but I don't think it's absolutely necessary at this stage. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, that's fine for that.
Are you happy with that, Councillor Hilliard?
Yes, thanks for that, and happy to second.
Thank you very much. Councillor O'Neill. Councillor O'Neill?
Yeah, I thought, I think it was Councillor Bartlett proposed that we move this forward with the two conditions added, and I seconded it.
Okay, that is fine. Thank you very much. I think we will now move on to the vote, as we have you stated, been proposal moved and seconded. I think this is a very good idea, and as I say, I think the inclusion, add the condition about permitted development rights being removed, I think is an excellent step forward, and I fully concur with what Councillor Stribley said about that being there. I think it's a really good idea. So we will move forward the vote. Once again, I will call your names in order. Just before we go to the vote, I am aware that Councillor Simon McCormack, the Vice Chairman, did join us at the start of this application, and therefore will be taking part in the voting of this, and welcome to the meeting, Councillor McCormack. So starting off with yourself, Councillor McCormack. 4. And Councillor Barron. 4. Councillor Bartlett.
4.
Councillor Mike Brook.
4.
Councillor Bull.
4.
Councillor Davies.
4.
Councillor Hall.
4.
Councillor Hilliard.
4.
Councillor Johnson.
4.
Councillor Lepodovin.
Abstain.
Councillor Lawton.
4.
Councillor O'Neill.
4.
Councillor Stribley.
4.
And myself, Councillor Kelsey, also 4. Mr. Harrod, could we have the numbers for that application, please?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. So there was 13 for, 0 against, and 1 abstention.
Therefore, that application is granted with the additions of the two, conditions that members asked to have added. Thank you very much, and thank you for the councillors that took part and spoke. Thank you. Moving on, we will now move to item 6G, which is 44 Western Road in Poole. And again, I would ask Mr. Evans to present the case, please.
Chairman, I'm assuming that you can now see the presentation.
I can, Mr. Evans, thank you.
Just before, let me just remind the committee, it's before the committee because the number of representations received triggering the new terms within the Constitution. To put the site into context, off the western side of the avenue, south of County Gates roundabout, and perhaps to help members orientate it even more, if I were to say that this is the staggered light controlled junction that we all enjoy queuing at to get from Western Road onto the avenue or up the avenue. So just to the west of that, Ashton Court, residential block of flats, Camford Chase, a residential care home, and 2 existing semi-detached houses adjacent site 42 and 44. The site is predominantly land carved from the former curtilage of number 44. In some of the images you'll see some 2-storey, 3-storey homes in the background. They are homes in Forest Road, access from Forest Road, and represent redevelopments that have taken place from some of the extensive plots on Forest Road. So just to help you put it into the context, the access to the care home, to Camford Chase care home, the 42 and 44 pair of semi-detached houses, and Ashton Court, which sits at the junction by the traffic lights. 44 and 42, just draw your attention, some of the design features, slightly reduced eaves height, design finish, small, quite an urban kind of setting, attractive pair of semi-detached houses sitting comfortably within their plots. Just without the wider context, Camford Chase, the adjacent care home, the rear curtilage, former rear curtilage of number 44. The flats you can see in the background are on the other side of Western Road beyond the carriageway, but 44 and 42 with their shared access and the access going beyond that, and which would be used to afford access to the development that you're now considering, which is the erection of a pair of semi-detached houses. Let me just take you through a little bit of the history of this site. Outlined in purple and tagged approved footprint is an extant planning permission for 1 dwelling. The site's been cleared, but no progress made, no commencement so far as I'm aware of that, but nevertheless an extant consent for a single dwelling. The right-hand side is a previous proposal for a pair of semi-detached houses following the granting of one house on the site. So an approval for a pair of houses, 2 detached houses, and I'll just draw your attention to a couple of aspects of that in terms of the position relative to the end elevation in which there is windows to habitable accommodation in number 44. So that relationship, also the provision of amenity space associated with the 2 houses, and also the dominance of this car park in the centre of the site. So I'd also just invite you to look at that line there, which there is a common feature there which you can align it with. You'll see that the boundary of the previously refused scheme terminated about halfway down this feature on the plan, which corresponds with about there. So the scheme that you're now considering has had additional land added into the application site. It's now semi-detached houses rather than 2 detached houses, and they're orientated such that the division between the 2 houses is down the centre line of the ridge, so that they both have the benefit of private amenity space to the north of the houses, albeit. We'll come back to why that's a good thing in a moment. You'll see that there's an increased level of separation from what was proposed originally for 2 houses in terms of development on the boundary, so significant separation, something like 13.5, 14 metres of separation across there. The car parking has now moved into this area of the site, so clearly there's the 2 front doors, let's call it, on this aspect with their car parking in this area. I'll come back to the trees, but there is a reason for that being there and how it's been done. So, what do they look like? Terrace semi-detached houses, the division between the two is longitudinally. So on the south elevation, away from the existing, so let's just give you that orientation again. So the south elevation, away from the existing house at 44, dividing line down the middle to the south, the aspect towards the rear elevation number 44, now that with that greater separation distance, the aspect to the shade access way, and then the aspect to the adjoining Camford Chase care home. And I draw your attention to a couple of windows in there. That window is divided between two rooms. The right-hand part of that window to a bedroom that's also lit by a window on this south elevation. The other half of the window being the sole window to one of the bedrooms in this scheme, but carefully positioned so that, albeit that it's very close to the boundary of the shared common grounds of the care home, it would not give rise to significant substantial overlooking in normal everyday use. And just to underline that, the second window to this bedroom, this line being effectively the boundary to the care home, that one window at first floor level into the bedroom with an aspect across part of the gardens of the care home, separation of 20 metres plus to any windows or any living accommodation. And I draw your attention to how care has been taken with the design in terms of where that window has been put in the room. So in normal use, you would not get a great degree of overlooking from that window. You can't rule out the possibility, but in normal use that would not be an issue, and I would take a view that that would not give rise to any material harm from overlooking. Again, to put it in the context of the existing buildings at 42 and 44, I drew attention to that slightly reduced eaves line. Again, that design feature being picked up by the current proposal. Purple outline, the approved single house in terms of its size, so slightly lower, slightly reduced footprint. The blue you can disregard as a scheme that in its gestation, this scheme went through that as an earlier stage, and that has never been before anyone for consideration. So it was merely a stage that did not come up to scratch, and the design has moved on. I draw attention to this, carports. So the car parking to the south side of the site in this area, covered by a carport. Reason for that being this area tends to be shaded to a degree and may be subject to detritus from nearby trees, and therefore part of the concern about this scheme, apart from the size of the amenity space, was that it was very much within the shade of the trees to the south of it. So by utilising this area for car parking, by avoiding the harm and the nuisance that might arise by having cars parked in that area, the nuisance to the residents and to the cars from detritus and leaf mould, for instance, it deals with the amenity and the risk of pressure to undertake work on those trees from the nuisance that they could potentially cause. Looking at the trees, substantial trees all to the south of the site. Can I just draw attention to that one tree there, and then a row of trees? And let me take you to the next drawing, which is with a rather wonky line that I've drawn on it, an indication of the tree protection, the root protection zones. So the one tree that I highlighted, and then the row of trees, all of them beyond the end of the application site. So whilst you're looking at substantial trees beyond the application site, and therefore potentially casting detritus and shade into the area, in this area and onwards, which is the application site, none of those trees are within the application site and in roots, and in fact their root protection zones, which I've tried to ghost in there, none of them are encroached on by the development. Some slight encroachment into a part of a root protection zone by the carport structure, but the nature of that structure is such that that would not cause any substantial risk of loss of that tree or any likelihood of material harm to its well-being of future retention. So a scheme that is two well-proportioned, attractive semi-detached houses that fit comfortably within the wider context of the area, reflect the character of the area, can be achieved without loss of light outlook or the bearing in respect of any adjacent home. We deliver two new homes in a sustainable way, albeit outside of the more sustainable locations within the borough. The recommendation, therefore, Chairman, since we have already secured the necessary mitigation in respect of heathland and impact on recreation use of the harbour, the recommendation is to approve. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Mr. Harrod.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. We have two objectors' representations, the first of which being from a Mr. Dugald Eady, who states, I am writing on behalf of the Branksome Park and Camford Cliffs Residents Association, for which I serve as planning officer. I do not have any professional experience in this area, but I monitor and comment on developments on behalf of our members, of whom there are several thousand. The residents of Ashton Court have a block membership of our association, and my comments are mainly on their behalf. The history of this site shows that Ashton Court residents have tried very hard to object to the various proposals, both individually and through their own residents association. A plan was approved in February 2018 for a single house on this site, which appeared to be reasonably set back and also had adequate parking provision. The latest proposal for two semi-detached houses is too dense for the site and will create significant parking issues. I find it particularly annoying that the various site plans show in red an access road without admitting that it is actually a shared drive with Ashton Court. I realise that legal issues are not included in planning decisions, but this is blatant misrepresentation. Back in July 2019, the lawyers acting for Ashton Court stated that they would start injunction proceedings because of the abuse of rights of way originally granted. This was in response to an earlier application for two houses on the site. Our local area includes a large number of blocks of flats developed over a number of decades, mainly on the land originally owned by the Branksome Towers estate. The large majority of these developments allow plenty of space for trees, gardens, parking and garaging. That helps preserve the overall character of our area. This proposal is one of many which seeks to increase the density of housing, clearly for financial purposes, without paying attention to the impact on residents. We would appreciate it if the Planning Committee decided to refuse this application. Moving on to the second representation, this is from a Mr. Andrew Elliott, and he states, this is written on behalf of Ashton Court's Residents Association seeking a refusal of this application. There is an acceptance from the association that the consent for a single detached two-bed dwelling on this site provides a design solution that works both for the site and for the adjoining residents. This building is set back from the access road in keeping with numbers 42, 44 and 42. And there is adequate screening along the building's frontage and more suitable parking provision. The development company seems insistent that this site can support 2 3-bedroom dwellings. The fact that they are currently on their fourth design speaks volumes as to the site's inability to support a viable scheme. The first scheme was refused, the second withdrawn, and a third significantly redesigned in mid-application. We are now left with the poorest design for just about all concerned, including any potential occupiers. The current design is compromised in many ways. The building orientation presents problems for both dwellings. One sits hard up against a 3-metre high boundary with the 2 main windows now facing north. The other is on the boundary of the access road opposite the bin store and flat car parking spaces. Shading from surrounding trees and the large carport will further worsen amenity value. Indeed, the Council's Arboricultural Officer stated in his report 29th of May 2020 that he is not able to support the layout due to tree shading. The proposed car parking for the semis is nose to tail under a carport and onto a tight bend and opposite 4 of the flat's garages. This is likely to cause confusion and potential for accidents when cars are shuffled around. There is no provision for visitors parking for the houses. Vehicle access for any occupants is also likely to be problematic. The red line on the application plan shows both the house plot and a single width right of way, which runs directly up to the Western Road. Legal roads are only for access up and down this particular section within this red line. In practice, this means that any vehicle larger than car size wanting to access the site will either need to reverse in or out. The refuse lorry already does this. This will cause problems without a strict management protocol or enforcement controls being put in place. In conclusion, I would ask you to refer back to the planning officer's primary reasons for refusal for the first application. The current report recommendation would seem to completely contradict this. And moving on to the statement from the applicant, this is from a Mr. Matt Annan, and he writes, "Good afternoon, members. I wish to outline the main considerations why we feel planning should be granted today in line with the officer's recommendation. Firstly, character and appearance. Since the previously withdrawn scheme, members should be aware that the site area has been increased to include additional land to the south, which reduces the density in building to plot ratios from that of the previous scheme. Furthermore, the scale, height and orientation of the semi-detached dwellings are now similar to the neighbouring dwellings at 42 and 44 Western Road, complementing the appearance of those adjoining dwellings as can be seen from the street scene at the end of the officer's report. Whilst reviewing the plans, members will note from the site plan that each dwelling has an appropriately sized and private garden and 2 parking spaces each in line with the council's guidance. As such, the scheme will preserve the characters area. Secondly, amenity. The proposed dwellings have been thoughtfully designed to ensure that neighbouring amenity will not be compromised. In terms of number 44 to the north, there will be sufficient separation between the 2 buildings to preserve neighbouring amenity in terms of daylighting and outlook. Whilst the scheme introduces a first floor window-to-window arrangement with this property, a similar relationship was accepted on the extant scheme, so some mutual overlooking has been established between the 2 dwellings. Your officer agrees that this would not be any greater impact on the neighbouring privacy than would be associated with the extant permission. In terms of Ashton Court to the east, windows have views towards the communal garden and garages, but again, these are in a similar position to the extant permission. Also, the separation distances would exceed 20 metres, and the views from the proposed windows would be both oblique and through intervening planting, such that the privacy of these occupants would therefore be preserved. In terms of Camford Chase to the west, windows on the rear elevation would have views towards the communal garden. Again, the facing windows would have a separation distance exceeding 20 metres. To the south, the first floor windows serve a bathroom and bedroom which would look towards the canopies of the protected trees to the south. There would be adequate separation from the trees to provide reasonable daylighting and outlook. Neighbouring amenity and privacy on all sides would therefore be preserved by the development. Thirdly, trees. There are protected trees on the adjacent sites. The proposed dwellings would be outside of all root protection zones, and the council's tree officer is satisfied that the mitigation measures proposed in respect of all of these trees will protect them from direct harm. Thank you. And finally, a representation from Mr. Mark Adams, who writes, "As you will be aware from the officer's report, there is a consented and extant scheme on this site for a large detached house, highlighted in pink on the plans pack which accompanies the agenda. This forms a significant material planning consideration, and thus the principle of severing the site for additional residential dwellings has been previously accepted. We have submitted the current application in response to a previously withdrawn application. I understand that the previous application was very close to being approved, but the officer felt slightly uncomfortable with the size of the plots. As a direct response, we negotiated with the adjacent landowner to secure additional land, meaning a larger application site with larger plots for the 2 dwellings is now achievable. In addition, throughout the current application process, our architects have worked closely with your professional officers, which I thank them for their time and effort in this regard, which has resulted in the footprint, sizing and scale of the 2 semi-detached dwellings reflecting the key aspects of the extant permission on site. This ultimately has meant that your officer is now in support of the scheme. Members will be aware of the current government initiatives to get Britain building, but even before coronavirus at the local level, the strategic objective of the Poole local plan is to deliver a wide range and mix of homes in the most sustainable locations. PP1 states that the Council will take a positive approach that reflects the presumption in favour of sustainable development contained in the NPPF. Whilst the site falls outside of the Sustainable Transport Corridor, outside of these areas, new dwellings should be permitted, provided that the proposal is capable of delivering sustainable patterns of development. Sustainability of the proposal is based upon its acceptance on other material planning considerations which have been discussed in the Pure Town Planning's deputation. The application site lies within the established and highly desirable residential area. This is a great opportunity to provide 2 much-needed, sensitively designed small family dwellings in a sustainable location close to local shops, services and schools, and which will contribute positively to the character and appearance of the area. As confirmed by your planning, tree and highways officers, all previous concerns raised by the local planning officers, by the local planning authority on previous applications have been overcome. As such, councillors, we believe that this scheme would not adversely affect the character of the area or the amenities of neighbouring properties, nor detrimentally impact on protected trees. I hope that you agree with your planning officer and their team leader's recommendation to grant planning permission for this application and vote in favour of approving this proposal accordingly. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Harry. Councillor Iyengar, are you wishing to speak?
Yes, thank you, Chairman.
No problem, carry on.
Okay, as committee knows, there's an existing approval for 1 2-bedroomed house on the site. During that application, residents proved they are not anti-development. They appreciated that the new dwelling would be set back from the road in keeping with neighbouring houses, that the screening would protect privacy, and the car parking would be enough. In summary, a scheme that worked for the dimensions of the site. However, we're here today because the developer, perhaps encouraged by that response, feels that the edge hasn't been tested until residents are somewhat distressed and writing into the council in large numbers, hence our committee hearing today. Since the approved design, I think there have been 3 or 4 revisions to the design, each taking it to a new level of ambition. The first revision was refused, the second withdrawn, and the third significantly redesigned in mid-application. The latest scheme for 2 semi-detached 3-bedroom houses is one that has no support from local residents. It's seeking to do too much in too small a space. People wonder even if the future occupants of the new homes will even find it nice once they've lived there for a while and got to know how tightly packed everything is. For instance, first point, one of the houses goes right up to the shared access road. The road is narrow and single track. 6 windows in the new house look only a short distance into Ashton Court opposite. It harms the privacy for everyone. The flats also have 5 parking spaces and a bin store in that area, which also adds to the feeling of busyness and lack of privacy. As a second point, the other home on the other side of the semi is close to the boundary with Canford Chase Nursing Home, which is a 3-metre screening of hedge or fence. Which has next to it a 3-metre screening of hedge or fence. The home will have its main windows facing north. Putting these facts together, this isn't a thoughtful design because natural light will be compromised, worsened by the tree canopy and the new carport. The council's arboricultural officer has already stated his opposition to the layout due to the tree shading. And as a third point, the proposed car parking for the new homes is, as has been said, nose to tail, under a carport, and is situated on a tight bend. Cars are likely to be trapped in, and the scheme requires other cars to be manoeuvred to let it out. What's also relevant here is that the site boundary only covers the single track road, so any vehicle manoeuvring may require reversing into the adjacent site in Ashton Court. As a design, this strikes me as unacceptable. And if there's an implicit intention by the proposer that cars avoid this problem by parking in nearby streets, there isn't any nearby parking, with much of the roads yellow lined for good reason. The very first application on this site was refused by the council on the basis that, and I quote from the officer's report, the proposed development by virtue of the plot sizes and density has resulted in a layout and scale of development which does not respect that of the surrounding area, and as such cannot be accommodated in a manner which would preserve or enhance the area's residential character, and would therefore fail to deliver a sustainable pattern of development. The proposals are therefore contrary, in the officer's view, to policies PP02, PP27 and PP28 of Poole's local plan of November 2018. That feedback was taken, and a more sensible scheme was then proposed and approved. And as we know, it wasn't built, and we're now here with another go at a more ambitious scheme that ignores the feedback the officer gave and seeks to do much, much more. In summary, committee members, local residents are not anti-development, as I hope you think they have proved. They accepted the original scheme, but they're deeply concerned about this new proposal. They respectfully ask the committee to reject it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Inger. Mr. Evans, would you like to come back on anything you've heard from any of the deputations?
Just pick up one or 2 points, Chairman. There was suggestion that the refuse lorry already uses the access way, and therefore clearly it isn't access to the existing houses, it isn't access to the flat, so that's an existing situation. I would emphasise that our transportation colleagues have no objection to the scheme in terms of access. We've heard reference to the horticultural officer having issues with the scheme. The scheme that I believe their comments were based on was also a scheme that we, the planning officers, had issues with. I'd sort of draw your attention to the condition on the plans we're inviting you to approve, and they were submitted on the 14th of July, with the final tree protection scheme being submitted on the 28th of July. So this is an application that's evolved during its life. I think the original submission was slightly misguided in terms of what the best way to deal with the adjacent homes was, in terms of how it was looking, where it was looking to put the amenity space, where it was looking to put the car parking. And I think having spent some time on it, the case officer has found a solution to seek to deliver 2 new homes in a sustainable way on this site. So it is quite a different scheme to the scheme that attracted some of the original comments. The position of the amenity space, I think, has shifted quite significantly, and the parking has been shifted in such a way that it's less affected, or rather it facilitates the amenity space in the place that it does. The orientation of the amenity space, I'd suggest that if we're saying that all north facing or all gardens to the north of the house that they serve are untenable, I'd suggest that's difficult territory to take us. The amenity spaces to the north, to avoid it being to the south, where it would have given rise to pressure in respect of the shading of it from the trees immediately to the south. So I think this isn't about pushing the envelope. This is about finding a position that's in respect of acceptable, sustainable development, that's the optimum development for this site. And it's always interesting when the same case officer who came to the conclusion about the previous scheme is the case officer who is recommending approval on this, it having overcome the reasons for refusal that we've just heard. There were 2 reasons for refusal. One of those reasons for refusal was about the relationship of this previous scheme to number 44. So one of the 2 reasons for refusal has gone away with the removal of that second house in a position close to footfall. And again, if I can just take you to the outline of the existing approved house. It's stripped away a little bit of the footprint. This is on a bigger plot, remember, than the single house. Marginal changes to the scheme to accommodate a second house, I'd suggest in a way. Still, I hear the concerns that have been voiced by the councillors, but I think it is a wholly appropriate piece of development that does satisfy all of our policy considerations. A number of the issues that have been raised about title, ownership, access, are things outside of your consideration as a planning committee. It may well be that there is some kind of lien or some kind of covenant in respect of the use of this access by this piece of land. That's a matter outside of your consideration. The applicants, so far as we're aware, have served notice on all the appropriate persons with an interest in this land, and therefore we are entitled to take a view on the planning application. Whether they can secure the necessary accesses, rights or covenants, it's outside of the planning situation. And that we've heard that there are concerns by the adjacent flat residents who believe they have certain rights over the access. That would be a matter between the applicant and the management company for that flat. It's not something that we would need to get involved in dealing with the planning application. You should concern yourself, therefore, only with, as it were, in that respect, the physical manifestation of the buildings rather than the entitlements to use certain bits of land for their access. I think that's all I need to say at this point, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Members, is there anyone that would like to come forward and start the debate, please? By that being no one coming forward, I am presuming that, sorry, Councillor Bartlett.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think that this is quite an appropriate development for this piece of land, and I actually think it will enhance the character of the area and fits in well, improves in fact what's already there. I can't see any material planning reasons why we should object to it, so I'm happy to move to grant it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bartlett. Before I go to other speakers, I will ask, is there anyone that is prepared to second that motion at this time?
I'll happily second that, Chairman. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Would you like to speak, or would you like others to speak first?
No, I'm happy to speak, Chairman. Let me just turn on my video.
Thank you.
There we are. I hope you can see me.
We can.
Yeah, no, I agree very much with what Councillor Bartlett has said. I think that the expansion of the plot more than outweighs any overcrowding, in my view. I think it's a well-designed building, and I can't see any planning issues. So yes, no, I completely agree with what Councillor Bartlett has said. I'm more than happy to second this.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Councillor Stribley.
Thank you, Chairman. I am very reluctant over this one, and I'm really with the ward councillor and his representations on it. I do have serious concerns. Suddenly the plot is that little bit bigger, and it's not very far from here. There is we gave years ago permission for a severance and a dwelling, and then lo and behold, the dwelling was built, but the plot was never actually severed, and the site remained a lot smaller than would ever have been granted permission in the area. So if the committee is minded to approve, I would request that they put a condition that the boundary treatments, and I presume there will be some boundary to the south of the site, delineating it exactly, that the boundary treatment shall be the first operation. It used to be one dwelling per 3/4 of an acre in this area. Things have changed a great deal, but you know, tucking things off the side of driveways doesn't do any favours, I think, for people in the rest homes, nor for the new residents here. I just can't get with this application at all. Sorry, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stribley. Mr. Evans, did you have any response to that, please?
Yes, Chairman. Perhaps I can encapsulate the best way forward to address Councillor Stribley's concerns. Rather than requiring the boundary treatment, because clearly that is something that is potentially transient over the life of the property, I would suggest that a more appropriate condition, if she's concerned about the curtilage of the houses being as shown on the plan, and that there's no slippage, shall we say, of any of the boundaries to reduce the size of the plot again, or to subsequently take land out of the curtilage. And it would, if that is her concern, be appropriate for the condition that requires that all of the amenity space parking areas, as shown on the approved plan, if you are minded to approve it, be retained at all times for that purpose. That prevents it moving into other curtilages over the life of the building, and that may be an appropriate way to deal with Councillor Stribley's concern.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. I appreciate that. Councillor Mike Brooks.
Fine, thank you, Chair. Just bear with me while I try to get my video working. It always switches off in the first instance. Okay. I'm always very, very dubious about backland development. I think it creates very many problems and issues, and the NPPF requires backland development to be of very high quality for it to be approved. Now, looking at this, although we've got extra land supposedly present to make it feasible, the amenity space and the amenity character, I believe, is substandard. The shading from the trees and the high degree of hard surfacing to the south, that is going to create quite a difficult, gloomy environment for the occupants, and also, of course, having the main amenity to the north, it is going to be in shadow from the houses themselves for most of the day, most of the year. So for me, that is a very significant issue. It reduces the whole quality of the design, and I think also the two together are actually too large for that particular plot, and I will not be supporting the recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Brooke. Mr. Evans, was there anything you would like to respond to with that, please?
Chairman, only that the inclusion of the amenity space to the north of the house, where the shading is from the house itself rather than from the trees, was a deliberate design change as part of the evolution of the scheme. Clearly, shading of the southern part of the site by the trees avoid the risk, or rather the likelihood of possibility of pressure for removal of branches or felling it is reduced by this area being more functional car parking, and with the detritus issue dealt with by the carport. That leaves the, although it's to the north of the house, clearly it's largely unshaded for a large part of the day from any of the adjacent trees. I mean, many of us live in houses where parts of our garden are shaded by our own houses for at least parts of the day. And I would suggest that the orientation of it being to the north of the houses is not in any way an impediment to the provision of appropriate amounts and appropriately attractive amenity space for the two households that would occupy this property. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Before I go to the vote on this, Councillor Bartlett and Councillor Johnson, are you both happy for the suggested condition to go on to this approval?
Yes, I'm content, Chair. Thank you.
Agreed.
Thank you very much. In that case, we will move forward with the vote, and we have a move to grant with the additional condition suggested by Mr. Evans. And I will call names again one by one, and we will go through. Councillor McCormack, Vice Chairman.
For.
Councillor Barron.
Against.
Councillor Bartlett.
For.
Councillor Mike Brooke.
Against.
Councillor Simon Bull.
Against.
Councillor Malcolm Davies.
For.
Councillor Peter Hall.
Against.
Councillor Paul Hilliard.
For.
Councillor Toby Johnson.
For.
Councillor Marion Lepodovin.
For.
Councillor Bob Lawton.
For.
Councillor Tony O'Neill.
Against.
Councillor Ann Stribley.
Sorry, against.
And myself, Councillor Kelsey, I'm for. Could I have the numbers, please, Mr. Harrod?
Yes, Chairman. So I have 8 votes for and 6 votes against.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harrod. Therefore, that application is granted in line with the officer's recommendation, along with the added condition that was attached. Thank you very much to everyone on that one. We will now move on to the last application here this afternoon, and that is at Moorside, I believe. Sorry, I've lost my paperwork. Mr. Gould, you are presenting this one.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll just start the PowerPoint. It's Throopside Avenue.
Throopside, sorry, I apologise.
Number 50, no worries. Grateful if you could confirm when that comes up on the screen, Chairman.
Yeah, it's there now, Mr. Gould.
Thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon, members. Last item on today's list. I'll try and be brief because I know it's a warm afternoon. This is 50 Throopside Avenue. This is a proposal for alterations and conversion of an integral garage to form additional living space. Just an aerial shot to try and give members some context. This is the site up in the northern part of Bournemouth. Here we can see Castle Lane running west to east. Here we can see Castle Point, the shopping centre, and this roundabout here with the Broadway pub and then Broadway Lane leading up to Throopside. Coming in a bit closer, we can see Broadway Lane turning into Muscliffe Lane and then into Throopside Avenue. Number 50 is located right at the top of the cul-de-sac, here where I've got the cursor. Here's a red line for the site showing it again, as I say, tucked away at the top of the cul-de-sac. Coming in a bit closer. And then going back to an aerial view, looking round now towards the front of the property. So this is the property in question here. The garage is located on the right-hand side of the property, and we'll come down to street level now. We can see the application site and then with the red garage door. Members will have the plans in their pack, but I'll just briefly go over them. So we can see that the proposals involve removing the garage door, bricking up, inserting a window, using materials to match, and there we can see a proposed front elevation. So, Chairman, I've mentioned what the description of the development is, where the site is located. This is a property that is located in the Throop and Muckleshell Village Conservation Area. It's part of a development that was approved in 1984. So it's a later addition to the conservation area, and I think we can see that reflected in the more suburban character of the property, as opposed to some other properties in the wider conservation area where they are more historic. The works are fairly minor. They would ordinarily or could ordinarily constitute permitted development right, but a lot of the properties that were built in the North Bournemouth extensions around this area would have had their permitted development rights removed as part of the original planning permission, so hence why it has to come forward as a planning application. I've stated that the garage door will be removed and bricked up to create a provision for the insertion of a window, which will be of a similar design and materials to match the host property. The proposal does result in the loss of one car parking space, i.e. within the garage, but as you can see from the photograph in front of you, there is sufficient on-site parking for 2 vehicles, which is adequate for a property of this size. Just to denote, that line there is the threshold. So this area here is a shared part of a driveway with that neighbour to the left, and then once you cross that threshold, you're into your private sort of parking area. Chairman, the application doesn't give rise to any significant harm in terms of impact on residential amenity. It's merely an application that seeks to enhance the living accommodation for the occupiers, and it comes before committee because the applicant works for the planning department and therefore is triggered by the Constitution. The officer recommendation is to grant, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Ms. Gould. I appreciate that. As members will have heard, this is being dealt with because it is a member of staff of the planning department, and just to justify transparency, etc., this is the reason for it being with us today. We have no letters of objection, no support from anybody, so I will move straight to members on this one. And I have Councillor Paul Hilliard.
Thank you, Chairman. As this has just come in for committee, basically for transparency, and as the officer said, it could be done under permitted developments, I'm happy to propose as set out. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hilliard. Councillor Lepodovin.
He's beaten me to it. I was going to say that, so I'm very happy to second.
Gratefully accepted. Thank you, Councillor Lepodovin. Any other members wishing to speak at this time? Okay, with that being said, we will move straight to the vote on this one. Moved by Councillor Hilliard, seconded by Councillor Lepodovin. Councillor McCormack.
For.
Councillor Barron.
For.
Councillor Bartlett.
For.
Councillor Mike Brooke.
For.
Councillor Simon Bull.
For.
Councillor Malcolm Davies.
For.
Councillor Peter Hall.
For.
Councillor Paul Hilliard.
For.
Councillor Toby Johnson.
For.
Councillor Marion Lepodovin.
For.
Councillor Bob Lawton.
For.
Councillor Tony O'Neill.
For.
Councillor Ann Stribley.
For.
And myself, Councillor Kelsey, also for. Mr. Harrod.
Yes, Chairman. Just confirm that the result of that vote is unanimous for.
Thank you very much, Councillor Harrod. With that being said, that is therefore granted as per the officer's recommendation. And with that being the final application of today's meeting, I now call this meeting to a close, but I would ask members if they could just stay online for a few minutes once we leave the screening. Thank you.